Okay, if we can, we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, I would like to thank everybody again for waiting. We have got one of our other commission members here this evening. We have two that may yet make it in, so we'll wait for them to show, but we'll proceed at this point. This is the May 10th, 2018 meeting of the Jefferson City Planning and Zoning Commission. My name is Chris Jordan, and I am the chairman of the commission. I would like to remind all the commission members, folks in the audience, if you would please silence all of your electronic devices. And for the commission members, remind you to turn on your microphones when speaking and try to speak clearly. For those in the audience, when you come forward to speak, if you wish, please come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record, and once again speak clearly into the microphone. Proceedings tonight are being recorded, and we'd like to have that testimony if we need it. We will move on. We will start with the introduction of our council liaison.
Good evening, commission members. Carlos Graham, City Council Liaison to this commission.
Michael Lester.
Jack Deacon.
Dale Vaughn.
David Nunn.
Ann Strotman, City Staff.
Chris Yarnell.
Bunny Tricky Cotton.
Michelle Mahoney.
Shane Wade, City Staff.
Eric Barron, City Staff.
Ian Zollinger, City Staff.
Sonny Sanders, City Staff.
Brian Wolford, City Staff.
David Bangy, City Staff.
Thank you. The City Code authorizes 9 regular members and 3 alternates. Alternates are designated to vote upon the absence or disqualification of a regular member. A quorum of 5 members or alternates is necessary to conduct business. I do believe we will have a quorum tonight. Our voting members will be Bunny Tricky Cotton, Jack Deacon, Michael Lester, David Nunn, Dale Vaughn, Chris Yarnell, will Michelle vote? And Michelle Mahoney, who's normally an alternate, will vote this evening. The regular members that are absent at this time are Bob George, Dean Dutoy. Our alternates that are absent are Blake Marcus and Matthew Hall. Bob George and Matthew Hall are expected this evening, but we have not yet seen them. Are there any members of this commission who will be disqualifying themselves from voting on any agenda item? Seeing none. The voting members, again, will be Bunny Tricky Cotton, Jack Deacon, Michael Lester, David Nunn, Dale Vaughn, Chris Yarnell, and Michelle Mahoney. I'd like to have a call for cases to make sure someone here is to present those cases. So if you would just raise your hand so we know that someone's here. Our first case is case P18008-1001 West High Street. It's a special exception permit. Is there someone here? Thank you, sir. Our next case is case number P18009-1632 Tanner Bridge Road. Again, a special exception permit. Is there someone here? Thank you. Next case is case P18010-412 Cherry Street. Again, another special exception permit. Thank you, sir. The next case is P18011-134 West Circle. Again, a special exception permit. Thank you, ma'am. Next is case P18012-1129 Cedar City Drive, a special exception permit. Thank you, sir. And lastly, case number P18013-2303 West Main Street is appeal of a sidewalk deferral decision. Is there someone here for that? Thank you, sir. Have we received any requests for continuance?
No.
Okay. Is there any reason to reorder the agenda?
No.
Okay. Ian, if you will, please read the format of the hearing and order of testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to briefly describe the procedures of the Commission. The proceedings of this meeting are being recorded, so please step forward to the microphone when you speak and give your name and address for the record. The standard order of each case is as follows. After the introduction of the request by city staff, The applicant and their consultants will provide information on the request. The opening presentation by the applicant shall be limited to 10 minutes unless additional time is granted by the commission. The applicant shall have 3 additional minutes for closing testimony if requested. We will then ask to hear from supporters of the request. We will then ask to hear from opponents of the request. We will then ask to hear from anyone else who wishes to speak on the request. Testimony shall be limited to 3 minutes unless additional time is granted by the commission. City staff will then make their recommendation on the request. In order to reduce the time necessary to hear an application, reference to printed material, including staff reports and applicable findings, shall not be read into the record unless directed by the commission. The commission will close the testimony from the floor. The commission will then discuss the proposal, then publicly make its determination with reasons. The form of the motion shall be positive, that is, the motion shall be made to accept the request as presented, or with modifications, stipulations, or conditions. A final vote will be taken with ayes in favor, nays opposed. The chairman shall announce the results of the vote, specifying the number of votes cast in favor and the number of votes cast against. The following documents are entered as exhibits for all items under consideration at this meeting: the City Code of the City of Jefferson as amended, the Comprehensive Plan and Land Use Map, copies of applications under consideration, a list of property owners to whom notices were sent, and the affidavit of publication in the newspaper, copies of drawings, plans, or renderings under consideration, letters or memoranda from staff, staff reports, minutes of proceedings, correspondence, or other materials submitted by the public or the applicant, rules of procedure for the City of Jefferson Planning and Zoning Commission. These items are public record and available for inspection in the Department of Planning and Protected Services or through the Office of the City Clerk. Please be advised that any items that are presented, distributed, or otherwise received pertaining to the cases under consideration become the property of the Commission. This includes any photographs, drawings, petitions, and letters. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ian. At this point, we'll move to the adoption of the agenda. As city staff said, there is no reason to reorder, so we will entertain a motion to adopt the agenda as printed.
Move to adopt the agenda as printed.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries. Ms. Ann has provided us the minutes from our regular meeting of April 12th, 2018. When you have a chance to look through those, we will also entertain a motion on those.
Move to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Communication received. I believe we do have some communication this evening that has been distributed to the commission members. For case number P18010, we have a letter from Bill Meyer and Jane Beadham. And then for case number P18011, we have a letter as well from Patricia Taggart. So those have been distributed to the commission members, and I think everyone's had an opportunity to review those. We will move on to our new business and public hearing. First, we will open with case number P180081001 West High Street. It's a special exception permit. I think, Ian, you have a staff report.
Yes. Before we get into the case, I would like to give some history about this new ordinance and the reason why we have these 4 cases before us. On January 2nd, 2018, the City Council passed an ordinance dealing with short-term rentals. The purpose of which is to establish those rules and regulations that and specific use standards pertaining to short-term rentals. The new section of City Code outlines a couple of items for the Commission to look at when approving these special exception permits. Mainly the type, the short-term rental, is it a whole home, or is it just part of the home, or a rental space, as the city code outlines, the signage, and what is permitted for these short-term rentals, and also that it does not allow for receptions, parties, or weddings, or any type of gathering. It also outlines parking requirements for short-term rentals that rent a specific space, or for rentals that rent the entire home. It is also important to note that special exception permits do not transfer with the property. They are for the property owner themselves, and so if they sell the property, that does not guarantee that they can continue in the use. They would have to come back before the Planning and Zoning Commission to be able to continue to use it as a short-term rental. So with that, we can move forward to the first case as introduced by the chairman, case number P18008, 1001 West High Street. I'd like to draw your attention here to the location of the property. It is located here at West High Street and Brook Street on the corner there. The zoning is RA2. The property that the applicant is applying for a special exception permit for short-term rental is currently being used as a triplex. So it's applying for 2 of the apartments. One is being occupied, but in essence he's applying for all 3 of those for the potential of a short-term rental. The units themselves, the parking situation is not changing, and so no new requirements for parking would be imposed. I'm happy to answer any more questions about the application. The applicant is here to speak as well, and may answer more questions about the property.
Thank you, Ian. Do any of the commission members have any questions for Ian regarding this case, or, as we know, it's a new ordinance about the laws and the outline of what the city has for us?
Ian, and basically for all of these cases, or most of the ones we're going to get tonight, will the permit specify specifically what units are allowed to be rented on a short-term basis? In this case, only 2 of the 3.
With this application, this is a little bit different from the other applications, in the fact that there are 3 units. He's requesting that all 3 be permitted for short-term rentals to give flexibility, and he can speak more about that. The applicant can speak more about that, but that would be the request, is for all 3.
If he were, say, and kind of the way this is worded, I assume they were just looking for two of them. But either way, on the assumption that there were only 2 units, or if someone says I'm only doing this portion of my dwelling, will a permit specify that? Are they limited to only that space then at the time?
A majority of them are for the whole unit or the whole house. There is one application later that we'll talk about that is for a specific rental space, but the city code addresses that and what is permitted in a specific rental space. But I believe the motion could be that for the permit to be for the specific 2, if that was what was requested. In this case, it could be for a motion could be made for the 3 of them, and that's what the permit would be for. If that does that make sense?
Or it could be just limited if they just ask for 2, then it
Yes.
would be limited to just those 2.
Yeah, I think so. And I was kind of expecting some questions to arise on a multi-unit building. So it is permissible to allow more than one short-term rental on a property, if you can imagine an entire apartment complex going short-term rental. But the city code requirements are really pertaining to the specific unit. So yeah, if it was a specific units within a complex, then yeah, the application would need to state which ones. In this case, it's all three, and so it's really not relevant. But yeah, it would be specific to the unit. So, and when it gets down to a space within a building, I think it's really they're limited to one, basically one bedroom renting out, or one space. I think the application when we get to that is a little different, but and so that's the difference between a rental of a room basically within a house as opposed to renting the whole structure. The renting of the whole structure is definitely the most common. And so
if they got down to just one room, which is I know we have at least one here that's the case, is the permit somehow worded so that that's set out in there?
I don't know that it really needs to be, and because they're limited to one, and so as long as they're not exceeding one rental, and they're also limited to the number of people that are associated with that, then it's really not necessary. They just have a permit to rent one. And so in that case, it's actually rental of a room with option of a separate sleeping bed outside of that room, but it's just a space. And
so theoretically, and not just this one here, but just as an example, so someone could change. They could rent one room, and it could be any room that they wanted to, as long as there's only one at a time.
I could imagine that situation if an applicant were to change the room. I don't think we want to hear it again. So,
yeah.
But as long as it's limited to one. So
great. Yeah. Thanks very much.
So if I'm hearing this right, or maybe not, we could limit. Let's just say you have a single family residence that has, let's just say it's a ranch home, but it has a finished basement. The applicant could come to us and say, I want to ask for a special exception permit just for, let's say, the basement. And that would be what they would be allowed to rent only, or is it the whole structure? Are you getting, is that too restrictive? Or I guess I'm trying to figure out what the ordinance says and what we're.
I mean, ultimately, it's what's in their application. I think.
Okay.
I think it's kind of getting in, kind of into the weeds a little bit there. I could see where renting out just a basement area is that seems like a very clear dividing line there. But also can see the switching from one room to another. If it was this room and decided to do something else there and switch to another, okay. I don't know that necessarily changes the review of of that case. It's all internal. And so
my next question would be is if a permit is approved and we have a property that's being used as a special exception for these uses and it becomes a nuisance and it's not following the code, then what is the steps that would be taken to protect the neighborhood? I don't think we've addressed that.
And so we did do a lot of work and in terms of trying to identify those issues that have come up in other cases when doing our research of short-term rentals. And so I think a lot of the specific use standards that we put in place address a lot of the comments that are within the correspondence that you received this evening, concerns about parking or parties and things like that. And so it would be a code enforcement issue. And so we have code enforcement officers with the city that would investigate and address those issues if they arise.
And then ultimately, if it cannot be resolved, then the applicant would be asked to come back here and explain what's going on.
Yeah, it could be subject to revocation for failure to adhere to the standards.
Is that an administrative thing where you all would revoke it within the normal day-to-day operations, or once again will they come back here?
I believe it's a more of a legislative type of process, not a staff level.
So explain that to
for-
me then. A legislative process would be they would come back to us?
Basically come back, yes.
Okay.
So.
Once again, though, in the interim, if they have to come back, would there be a cease and desist between the violations and all that so that the neighborhood is being protected?
Just one moment.
Not automatically. City staff could ask for it, and we could go to the circuit court to get a temporary restraining order on that. Once we grant them this special exception, we've essentially given them a property right, so we would have to do the circuit court due process in order to revoke that property right. I will also mention that violation of our ordinance is a violation of the city code, subject to summons to municipal court as well, so there could be a fine imposed.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
Just as clarification, in case this comes up tonight too, what we're talking about here really wouldn't be too much different than what would happen if it were a long-term rental and they had people that were, you had a tenant that was acting up, having parties and creating a nuisance for the, so those kinds of situations would be handled in a relatively similar manner, I would assume.
Well, essentially, I think the standards for this are actually tighter than what a property owner could do with their own property. Essentially, a person renting a house can throw a party, but under a short-term rental, they cannot. So it is a little stricter, and so it is a little bit different. But there are mechanisms in place to deal with nuisances on the residential side as well.
Go ahead.
No, I just when we get done with questions, want to revert back to the case and not get too far away from the introduction of the case. But yes,
could be to the case. Can you refresh my memory on what the definition, the time frame for short term we used?
it's less than a month, wasn't it? Less than 1 month. So.
Okay, so if we go to 3 units being short-term rental on this, does that cause a problem with his long-term renter that he currently has?
Sorry, cause a problem with what?
Isn't there a one long-term renter in there now? Didn't I understand that?
With this, yes, with this application, there is now, and the applicant will be able to address those issues as to why he is seeking a special exception permit for short-term rental, and why versus short-term, long-term, and their preference and why they're doing that.
Okay, well, we'll just wait till we get to that point then.
So I noticed in one of the descriptions it mentioned about having smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, but I don't see it in others. What's the status of that requirement for short-term rentals?
And so as far as the zoning code and the review of the issue, as far as the zoning code is concerned, they have to meet their fire code and building code requirements for such a use. It's my understanding that involves having a smoke detector, carbon monoxide detector, because you're renting out space. I would defer that to the building regulations division and the fire department for official determination, because we are not the experts on that at the planning and zoning level.
So I can interpret that they are supposed to have, all of them are supposed to have smoke and carbon monoxide detectors.
If the building code and the fire code says they do, yes.
Again, do the commissioners have any other questions for city staff at this point? If not, we'll move along. Okay, we'll move along with case number P18008. We kind of got off a little sidetracked on trying to get educated on this new ordinance. Next, I would ask if you would come forward to present this case. If you would, please come forward and state your name and address for the record and fill us in on a few things that you'd like to do.
Okay, yes, my name's Mike Youngbluth. I live at 2107 Scenic Drive in Jefferson City, and I would like to be allowed to have short-term rentals in any of my 3 units in that triplex. Basically, visitors to Jefferson City like to have that option, and I think we should enable that for people coming to Jefferson City.
I know one of the commission members had a question about the use of 3 units for this special exception, and one of your units is currently being occupied by a long-term tenant.
Yes, the top unit currently is occupied by a long-term tenant, and there's no issues there right now. So I just want to be able to have the flexibility to have long-term or short-term, depending on market conditions or whatever. So.
All right. Do any of the commission members have any questions for the applicant at this point? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next, we'll move. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this request? If so, please come forward and state your name and address for the record. I'm seeing none. Is there anyone present who would like to speak in opposition to this request? If so, please come forward, state your name and address for the record. Seeing none. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak on this request? Please come forward, state your name and address for the record. Seeing none. At this point, I will close testimony. Ian, I will refer to you to the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff recommends approval of the proposed special exception permit. The application has addressed the necessary criteria of their application for a short-term rental. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir.
I have a question. Back to my original question. Is there a conflict between having short-term and long-term? Can he do both?
This application, with approving these 3 units, they would be able to do both as individual units. Either one can be a short-term rental or one can be a long-term rental. It's almost no different than having him leasing to someone who then decides to leave after a month. They're just leaving after a day or 2. The use is the same. It just happens to be shorter.
Do any of the commissioners have any additional questions for staff? I would like to mention that we have another commission member who has been able to make it to the meeting. Bob George is here. Glad to see you, Bob. Bob was not here at the start of this agenda item, so Bob, you will not be voting on this agenda item. And the next agenda item we'll pick up and let you vote there. Okay. Is there any other questions for city staff? I did not see any. At this time, we will entertain a motion.
I would move that we approve the special exception permit for short-term rental.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion passes 7-0. Ian, will this be forwarded to the city council? Where do we go with this next?
Yes, this goes forward to the city council. On June 18th.
June 18th.
6 p.m. here in these chambers.
Again, is that a public hearing? And if anyone would like to come and speak at the city council meeting, they would be allowed to do that.
Yes.
Okay. Well, very good. Appreciate you coming in tonight, sir. And once again, June 18th at 6 p.m. will be the city council meeting. We will move on to our next agenda item tonight, which is case number P18009, 1632 Tanner Bridge Road. Again, it is another special exception permit. Ian, would you give us a staff report on this one?
Yes, thank you. The location of the property is here on the corner of Tanner Bridge Road, where Flora Drive and Aurora Avenue meet. The applicant is applying for the zoning is RS2. So your reference single family residential. The applicant is applying for a short-term rental. The owner is requesting the special exception permit to be used for a specific space that they have designated rental space. The ordinance allows for a maximum of 1 rental space with a maximum of 4 people permitted as guests. In their narrative, the applicant states that because of the layout of the rental space, they can only allow a maximum of 3 guests at one time. Currently, no signage exists, although they have considered purchasing a guest parking sign. There is sufficient parking to the rear of the property. The ordinance does specify that for the rental of the short-term rental of a rental space, that there be enough parking for the residents and the applicant, or the residents and the renters, the short-term rental customers. The applicant is here to answer any questions and speak about the property. I'm happy to answer any questions as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Do any of the commission members have any questions for Ian or other city staff at this point?
Just real quickly, Ian, would this permit then limit them to only 3 guests?
If the ordinance limits them to 4, they are just stating in their narrative that they only allow themselves a maximum of 3 because of the space that they have. So the ordinance just limits them to 4.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for city staff at this point? Next, we will ask if there was someone here who would like to present this case. If there is, please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name is Missy Creed.
Missy, if you want to pull that down so you don't have to stand on your tippy toes. Perfect. Thank you.
My name is Missy Creed, and we live at 1632 Tanner Bridge Road. And we are seeking this exemption to the permit so we can continue to host Airbnb guests from all over the world. We personally like to travel and use Airbnb. It's a great way to experience local living, and it's a more cozy and unique travel experience. And being from Jeff City and very proud of where we are, I enjoy hosting travelers to show them a more local feel and what we have to offer. So I don't know, did everyone get this? Mm-hmm. Okay. So as you guys can see, I've kind of laid out exactly what we do. So I'm here for questions if you have any.
Thank you, Ms. Creed. Does any of the commission members have any questions?
Just real quickly, more out of just curiosity, since this is new for Jefferson City, what's been your experience when you have rented this out? Like roughly how many different people during a 1-year period will you get?
I think we've had just about 12 visitors stay with us, all varying times. Some people just stay one night. The longest we had was 15 days. It was the guy who was here to clean when the power plant shuts down, and they do a big cleaning. He was here for that. And that was, every experience has been great. The great thing about Airbnb and similar, but on a higher level, I would say, than Uber, is that this is all review based. So before anyone stays with me in our house, I can check the reviews from previous hosts. And but sometimes, there are a lot of new Airbnb users, so some of them, it's been their first experience with us. And I actually really like that, because then I know that their first experience with Airbnb is going to be a good one. And on the flip side of that, when you are a guest, you are kind of on your best behavior because it is so heavily influenced by reviews. You want to get a good review. So guests that come and stay in our house, I feel like they are typically on their best behavior, and they're trying to be a good guest.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you. Appreciate it. Next, we will ask again, is there anyone in the audience who'd like to come forward and speak in favor of this request? Please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Dr. Linda Landon. I live at 1811 Forest Park Court here in Jefferson City. I'm here to speak on behalf of Missy and Joe. Missy is a responsible business owner here in Jeff City. Before she opened her Airbnb rental space, she sought out the advice of other experienced Airbnb rental people. So she knew what she was getting into, and she has planned very well for this. Having an Airbnb rental space is important to her in other ways. She recently started a blog called jeffcityblog.com, which is intended to attract tourists to Jeff City by highlighting all the fun things there are to do here in Jeff City. So by having an Airbnb space and promoting Airbnb usage here in Jeff City, she is supporting that vision that Jeff City is a place where people will want to come and visit. And the customer segment that likes to stay in Airbnbs will also be attracted through these types of rental spaces. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any commission members have any questions for Ms. Landon? Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who'd like to come forward and speak in favor of this request? Seeing none. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to come forward and speak in opposition to this request? Seeing none. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak on this request? At this point, I will close testimony. Ian, we'll ask for your staff report.
Yes. The staff recommends approval of the proposed special exception permit. The applicant has stressed the criteria necessary for the short-term rental. The parking requirement for a rental space, like I said before, requires there's space for the residents and the guests, and there's ample space here to the rear of the property. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Do the commissioners have any questions for Ian or other city staff at this point? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve the request for special exception permit for a short-term rental.
Second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? The motion carries 8-0. Again, this will be forwarded to the City Council on June 18th at 6 p.m.
Yes, that's correct.
And again, it will be a public hearing if anyone would like to come and testify.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for coming this evening. Next, we'll move on to our next case. It's case number P18010, 412 Cherry Street. Again, a special exception permit. Ian, if you have a staff report for us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The location of the property is here at Cherry Street and East Hanley Way. The applicant, the zoning is RA2. The applicant is requesting a special exception permit for a short-term rental of the entire residence. It is important to note that for parking on the opposite side of the street, parking is not allowed on this side of the street, but on the side of the street where the property is located, parking is available for the residents. Also, it's important to note in the narrative, the applicant states that they have their max adult capacity advertised for 6. City Code only allows for a maximum of 5 unrelated persons or any number of related persons by blood, marriage, or adoption shall be permitted as lodging guests. The applicant is here for any questions, and I'm happy to answer any more questions about the property.
Thank you, Ian. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for Ian or other city staff? Ian, did I hear you right that the applicant is asking for 6 adults, but city code would only require 5?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So we definitely need to make sure that that
Well,
is...
it would be 5 or any number of those who are related by blood, marriage, or adoption.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for city staff?
What's the reasoning for cutting it down to 5?
It's the same definition as a family within the zoning code, and so we felt it important to make sure that the cap for a short-term rental is the same as a cap for a single-family residence. And so you cannot have a single-family residence with 6 unrelated college students or whatever underneath one house. You're capped at 5. But if you have a very large family, you can all stay under one roof. So.
Any other questions for city staff from the commissioners? Yes, ma'am. Turn your microphone on.
Maybe this
Thank
is as simple as, so 3 married couples is fine to stay in this property?
No. 3 married couples would not all be related by blood, marriage, or
Right.
adoption unless they were all siblings or something.
I understand.
And so no, that would not be permitted. Because it'd, be 6 people and,
Correct.
they're not all
I
related.
understand, but 2, that's what I'm struggling with.
I think actually the answer is it could be. If you had, well, like Mr. Yarnell mentioned, if you had 3 brothers and they each got married.
That would be
that would
allowed.
work.
They are all related by
No different than your scenario
blood
with
and
college
marriage.
students.
So-
If you had 2 brothers or 2 sisters, so there's 2, and you put the other ones in there, I mean, in theory, you could do it.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Any other questions from the commissioners to city staff at this point?
Is there a cutoff at all on that?
A cutoff for-
what
a
if you
cutoff
have
for what?
like 20 people in a family?
Typically, in my experience, the applicant, I want to speak for the applicant. You wouldn't want to advertise for more than you can hold, anyways. If there was no a bedding for that many people, they probably wouldn't want to stay there. So I think it. Yeah.
It ever happened, but it is, it's a good question to ask hypothetically. But yeah, you're right. They probably wouldn't be able to accommodate that many people with
Yes.
beds. So.
Mr. Vaughn, I'd probably interject a little bit, once again, not being a code enforcement official, but I do believe there's some square footage requirements. I don't know if Mr. Nunn's ever been involved with that, but I do think that the building code official could get involved, and at some point there's a square footage requirement per occupant. So you could at some point say, a certain sized home will not support whatever number it is. I'm not real sure what those calculations are. I think so. Just be glad they're all gone. Once again, I'll ask, is there any other questions for city staff from the commissioners? Okay. If not, is there someone here who would like to present this case? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Gerardo Cornejo, and me and my wife Stacy Cornejo, we own the property at 412 Cherry Street. We're here requesting a special exemption permit with a minimum of 6 guests. Our experience with Airbnb, we've tried it all the way from the West Coast to the East Coast. We've stayed at St. Louis Cardinal games with a big group of 6+ adults that showed up. We try to experience Airbnb instead of doing the traditional renting. My wife just joined my business working full-time, so for a part-time gig for her, we hey, we like the Airbnb experience. Why don't we give it a try at one of our own houses? We've averaged this year about 10 to 15 stays a night a month. So that's how often you have to clean the house, and we're cleaning a whole house. So that's the big reason behind this, a minimum of 6 people, adults, is because you're offering them 3 bedrooms, or we offer 2 bedrooms and a pull-out couch, where the kids end up sleeping in, or an extra guest, a boyfriend, or whatever it was. We have a full stock kitchen, and everything is new. It was a remodeled house that we purchased on Cherry Street, so that's been completely renovated. And we enjoy it. It's a lot of hard work. So with all these permits and regulations coming into place, we understand we have to ask questions. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, that's hopefully I can answer them.
Any questions for the applicant?
We had a letter that complained that there was a lot of big partying in the neighborhood. I live on the East End. I think the East End gets a bad reputation just from reputation and not actuality. Have you had any trouble?
I did have one mistake of, like Mrs. Creed said, you can get reviews on these potential guests that come to stay at your house. This one was a new member. They had just joined in February. No reviews whatsoever. She's never stayed anywhere. It was a Wednesday night. I didn't have a good feeling about it. We ended up doing it, and of course our rules are there listed out. They still got broke. The rules got broken. Huge disruption. My neighbor was telling me what was happening. I can get in touch with the client that's staying there, but it was ignored. Ever since then, you can control who stays in your personal house. So ever since then, we've only accepted reviews of people that have members with Airbnb, that have been members of Airbnb for a while now, and we have now reached super host status, which we've had over 16 reviews, 5-star reviews in a row, with no cancellations. So that's been a lot of hard work, but we're very proud of it. And a lot of people, yesterday, people from Iowa, 2 retired couples came in, drove in. They got to check in early at noon, which is not a big thing you're allowed to do at a hotel. So they got to check in at noon, and then they went and rode the kiddie trail all day, and they just stayed the night here, and they were back to Iowa.
Now, can the Jeff City Police get involved? Can they immediately, since it's his property? I know if it's your own private property, there's another way of dealing with it, but can he just, if they get out of control, can he call the police and just say, hey, out?
Really, I believe for the police department, they'd really be responding to a noise complaint, and so there are certain regulations on that. But outside of that, they won't have any specific knowledge of a short-term rental situation. But the information obviously could be transferred to the code enforcement officers to investigate. But
and I'm friends with my neighbor. So we were also texting each other back and forth. Once she can tell, once I reached out to the guest, that they had been notified, because it calmed down, and it didn't go overnight, but it was starting in the beginning of the night.
It's really no different than a regular renter getting out of control. So I just wonder how many. You just got to stay
one
on
time.
top.
Yeah, we've had one bad experience.
Is there any other questions for the applicant at this point from the commissioners?
Like, Mr. Chair, if
Go ahead.
no, if I could go last, please.
Just to make sure you understand, you could have, even though you're applying for 6, you're limited to the 5 if they're not related.
Yeah, that doesn't. That's a change I have to make on Airbnb.
Okay.
Less beds to clean for us.
That was actually what I was going to address with the applicant is that the code that was put in place does limit you to 5. I was going to ask if you can live with that, if you can rearrange your business plan.
We could live with that.
Okay.
Gerardo, if you would do me a favor, just for clarification for our paperwork, would you state your name and address for the record?
Gerardo Cornejo, 412 Cherry Street.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Appreciate you guys looking at our requests.
Yep. Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, sir. I will ask if there's anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this request. If so, please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Seeing none. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to speak in opposition to this request? Please come forward. Seeing none. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak on this request? Please come forward. Seeing none. At this point, we will close testimony. Ian, I will ask for a staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff recommends approval of the special exception permit for short-term rental. The applicant has addressed the criteria necessary for the rental, and we've clarified that limit of 5 unrelated persons.
I do want to address that we did receive some correspondence on this request. There was 2 letters, and the commission did read those, so I just wanted to bring that up during this. At this point, I will ask if the commissioners have any questions for city staff. If not, would someone like to make a motion?
I would make a motion that we approve the request for the special exception permit for short-term rental with 5 unrelated members.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 8-0. Again, this will be sent to the City Council June 18th at 6 p.m.
Yes.
Public hearing, if anyone would like to come and testify.
Yes.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming in this evening. We will move on to our next case. It is case number P18011. Is 134 West Circle Drive. Is then again another special exception permit. Ian, if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The property is located at 134 West Circle Drive. The nearest major intersection is West Circle Drive and West Main Street. It is located to the north there before Chicago Road. The zoning of the property is residential single family 3, RS3. The property owner is requesting a special exception permit to rent the entire residence. I am happy to answer any questions, or the applicant is here as well to speak on any questions you may have about the property.
Thank you, Ian. Do any of the commission members have any questions for city staff? Is there someone in the audience who would like to present this case? If so, please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
I'm Julie Fitzmaurice, and I'm here for 134 West Circle Drive. Don't know what house it is. My permanent residence is in Lee Summit, Missouri. My husband and I bought this property in Jeff City in January. I have a daughter and a granddaughter who live here, and we find ourselves here about every other weekend, and then I am here 2 to 3 days every week helping take care of my granddaughter. So we are not living in this home permanently at this point in time. My husband grew up here, lived here for 40 years. We lived here together for 15, raised 1.5 children here before we moved to Kansas City. We love Jeff City and have every intention of returning here for retirement and living the rest of our days out in this little cottage. We travel a lot, and 20 years ago started staying in traditional bed and breakfast, and about the 5 or 6 past years we've utilized Airbnb or VRBO, vacation rentals by owner, and it's something that we really enjoy, having the space, family time, cooking, not eating out all the time, and enjoying activities, local activities in those areas that we travel to. So I love Jeff City, and I think people love to come here, and there's lots of things to do. I know that we received one letter not in favor from somebody within the 185-foot zone, and she's basically 183 feet from our front door, but that's okay. I'm in town all weekend, and I'm going to try to address Pat. I know her, and I think that I can ease any of her negative thoughts about the process. I did send letters to the majority of the people who are within that 185-foot area. We are hosting an open house and invited them to come by so we can meet our neighbors and, you know, let them know what we're up to. This home is furnished with all of our personal belongings. It's our second home. I value everything that's in there. And I am not going to rent to somebody who's going to destroy my property or take advantage of my property. I think it's a good thing for Jeff City. We have a lot of people in and out of here from everywhere, going to the lake, going through Jeff City, state track meet, people coming to look at college at Lincoln, you know, and our lawmakers too that might enjoy a short-term rental. I want to address some of the issues that the lady who wrote the letter, Pat, wrote the letter against my property. We have someone who mows our property every week. I have someone who cleans my house every week. We have ADT security, no smoking, no pets. I can accommodate 8 for my family and my kids and my grandchildren, but I only plan to use my house as a rental for 4. 2 bedrooms. I have plenty of parking. We have a garage available. We meet the city codes on fire and carbon monoxide. And no sign will go up because it's my home and I'm going to live there and I don't want to have a sign at my house. I have separate linens for the guests. They will not be sleeping on my sheets or using my towels. And my cleaning lady knows how to switch those out. We have not rented the property yet, but looking forward to being able to do that.
Thank you for your testimony. Is
You're
there
welcome.
any questions for the applicant from the commissioners? Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
I'll ask if there's anyone in the audience who would like to come forward and speak in favor of this request. If so, please come forward and give your name and address for the record. Seeing none. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this request? If so, please come forward. Seeing none. Is there anyone who'd like to speak on this request? If so, please come forward. Seeing none. I will close testimony, and Ian, will you provide us with a staff report?
Yes. The staff recommends approval of the proposed special exception permit. The applicant has addressed the criteria necessary for a short-term rental. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Once again, I will state that we did receive one letter of correspondence which was addressed by the applicant about this. At this point, do any of the commissioners have any questions for city staff? All right. If not, I will entertain a motion.
I would move that we approve the request for special exception permit for a short-term rental.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries 8-0. Again, this will be forwarded to the City Council for the June 18th meeting at 6 p.m. in the evening. It will be a public meeting.
Yes.
Yep. I would like to state if any of the applicants that have already gone through this evening, you're not required to stay for the rest if you don't want to. So just wanted to let you know you're not required to stay. We'd love for you to stay, but you don't have to. We will move on to our next case. It is case P18012-1129 Cedar City Drive, again as a special exception permit. Ian, tell us a little bit about it.
So before I go on to that case, just make a note here that the reason that we had so many cases is we sent for short-term rentals is we sent out letters to people advertising short-term rentals so that they had the chance to come in compliance with city code. We do not have any more for the coming months. We will be sending out more letters to invite people to come into compliance with city code before we take any action on that, just for your information. The next case, case P18-012-1129 Cedar City Drive. The property is located across the river. the nearest intersection is Oil Well Road and Cedar City, which is located here. The zoning of the property is M1, light industrial. And here is just an air photo of the property. It was once used as for farming and for auto body shop. Right here, the applicant is proposing to use the 6.28 acres of property for an outdoor mulch production and composting area facility. The reason, and also for your information, the applicant has also submitted an application for a variance to floodplain regulations through the Board of Adjustment. That will go to the Board of Adjustment on Tuesday, May 15th. The reason the applicant is applying for a special exception permit is the closest use that we could find in the permitted, the matrices of uses required a special exception permit for this application. For signage and lighting, staff recommends that the site adhere to the allowances of the M1 zoning district. The parking requirement for outdoor and indoor use of this kind is 1.1 parking stalls per employee. And I have the site plan for the property here. As you can see, the applicant is proposing a number of uses that go along with mulch production and composting that he'll talk to you about. And the building here is what is going before the Board of Adjustment. It's in the floodplain. It's mainly to store vehicles that'll be used for the production of mulch. He's also proposing a potential future building here. I'll zoom in a little better to see there. Staff also recommends that this entryway here be paved according to city standards. The parking lot be paved as well. For outdoor storage of yard waste and mulch, what it takes to do that. The applicant is proposing a fence, and he'll go into the details of that fence along the property line here. So here's a picture of the building that would be constructed if approved by the Board of Adjustment, and the fence that the applicant would like to use some examples of that. And the applicant and their consultant are here to answer any of those any questions that you may have, and I can answer any questions as well.
Thank you, Ian. I believe in your motion that there is some corrections. Is that from just you, or is Shane and the engineering division involved in this?
This would be the things that I pointed out as far as the paving of the entrance, that the site plan would reflect those changes, and any other technical edits that we may suggest to them in the final stages of their development.
Okay. So Shane, you don't have anything to address on this?
The only comments that I would make in regard to this would be in regard to the floodplain, that the applicant would be, as Ian had indicated, going to the Board of Adjustment for a variance for the floodplain in regard to a agricultural style building that would be greater than 400 square feet, that would be constructed at grade. It would not be elevated, but it would be wet flood proofed, and so that variance would be because of the additional size of the structure at the adjacent grade. Beyond that, I would have no other comments, Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Chair, if I may as well, the reason I point out the site plan and any potential changes that must be made is the special exception permit for this is like a PUD preliminary plan, that what is approved here is what is allowed with the special exception permit, and any changes would have to come back before the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for city staff?
Just out of curiosity, what's the BFE at that place? $558.
At the time that it was built in accordance with the current,
That's
the
why I
floodplain,
asked.
yeah.
Because it's 557,
Right.
67.
It was elevated and
And there
at the
wasn't a
time-
requirement, at that point in time, they raised the river elevation. In 12, the river elevation got changed. Or the BFE got changed.
Right.
In
That-
12.
That's correct. I think the agricultural style building that is being proposed at the grade of the current site is the variant, that's why it needs to go to the Board of Adjustment for that portion. The other portion, yeah, I don't know that meets the 1+ now. But it's, I guess, would be considered grandfathered for now. I mean, I don't know what that would have in terms of insurance or things like that, but.
I don't know what Don would say, but I know that the SEMA says it's grandfathered.
And I'm not sure in terms of it, as far as I know, there's no major improvements to the existing structure that are being proposed, but the applicant could probably discuss that in a little more detail.
Good. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I noticed the staff is concerned about the lighting details, that they haven't been submitted yet. Is that necessary to complete this project, or what?
For the lighting of the property, we ask that the staff recommends that they adhere to the M1 lighting district. And the reason we ask this is because with this special exception permit, some changes may be allowed to allow something different. And we just ask that it adhere to the zoning that is currently there.
And that has been addressed with the applicant?
It is because we haven't received a lighting plan from the applicant, and it is so that any future changes, such as lighting, would not have to come back before the Planning and Zoning Commission, but could be done as the zoning allows.
Well, I'm a little perplexed, as I thought we were dealing with a special exception permit. And I guess within that you can. Okay. I understand. Okay. I just want to make sure that. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for city staff from the commissioners at this point? If not, is there someone in the audience who'd like to come forward and state your name and address for the record and tell us a little bit more about it?
I'm Joshua Cordy. Our business would be at 1129 Cedar City Drive, and I'm here to speak on behalf of Cordy Sales LLC, which would own it, and then it'd be operated by or leased to Cordy Enterprises LLC, which is the only company that will work there. So,
do you have any concerns about the city's request for additional information and items that they have brought forth?
I don't think so.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to tell us about your project?
I would add, it's a mulch and compost production facility. That's what's in your code. I think some people in the room know, we have a tree service. I need a place, I need that building to keep my equipment inside, and we generally go to work during the day. We're operating on people's properties. And so the point of this is a place to go with the material, process it, and then resell it, which is some kind of an addition onto my business. So it's an important thing, but I wouldn't say that most of what we do is going to be running machinery on that all day long. You know, we leave, we go to work, we come back. We do this in a residential neighborhood right now, basically, in Boone County. So we just drive down the street, go to work, come back. And then a few days a year, we'll grind up the mulch and then load it in the truck and off it goes. So it sounds like I'm just opening this mulch factory, but in reality, that's something that I need to do on that property along with storing equipment.
Will there be retail sales of the product there?
People could come buy it there. Generally, we deliver it. You know, we load it up and take it there, but they could come by and buy it. I'm not in a place where anybody can see that we have that, and most people don't have a way to load up a large quantity of it, so we end up delivering it, but yeah. And I would add, my impression of the sales tax laws and the way I handle it now is wherever we go and deliver it, sales tax is at that location. So I really am, I sell a lot of the stuff in Columbia, and when I sell it in Columbia, they're going to pay Jeff City sales tax because that's the location. I don't have a separate facility up there. So that's in my little note that I put in there. Everything that gets sold, if there's sales tax on it, that's the location in Jeff City. I'm fine with that. And people they automatically pay a sales tax. You don't have any choice. If you want it, price is right, you pay it. So it will add to our business. It'll add employees, and it'll add sales tax revenue. And that's good. That's fine.
Thank you. Is there any questions for the applicant at this point from the commissioners? Thank you.
Hey, could I add one thing about that Airbnb? You have 30 seconds, if you don't mind. I've been thinking about this. I'm never in a group of people that are just Jeff City people. I have to tell you, so Jeff City has this beautiful architecture that no one sees because they drive right down 54. I have customers all over Columbia, Jeff City, some at the lake, and I just drive around these towns all the time. I did it all day today, both cities. Beautiful architecture. It's like a giant art gallery, but people don't know that because they come through. And in my experience, when I go somewhere else to another city, I'll stay in a place that's like an industrial area. It's a hotel, zone commercial, and I'm away from all the architecture. But there are some places like St. Genevieve, St. Charles, Savannah, Georgia, Charleston. People go there just to see buildings because it's something different. And that Airbnb, I never thought about that. That is a way to get people to come to Jefferson City and go away from the two main highways and see all these beautiful buildings. It's interesting. We stay in them because I have 8 kids and I can't stay in one hotel room. So it's like it's a necessity. And I have to get good reviews, so we leave it, we clean it up, everything's fine. But if I were in charge of tourism, I think I would print up a brochure and give it out to all these Airbnb people and have a little route. When you stay at an Airbnb place, this is the route you need to drive to see the architecture of Jefferson City, and you'll have something that nobody else has because it's like pre-Depression buildings. And Mexico, Sedalia, Fulton, Columbia, all these towns that used to be the same size as Jefferson City, they don't have the amount of architecture this town has. I would hand those things out like candy. If you can get people to drive away from those main highways, they'll have a whole different impression of this town. I could go into detail about that, working in the 2 different cities, what people think about each one. But the stuff, the houses that I end up my day down here, it's prettier. It's nicer to look at. They're old. They're really interesting. It's something that you would go and see. And when they stay in an Airbnb, they get out of the commercial area and they stay in a neighborhood. And people move to towns for that reason. So I thought I'd add that.
Appreciate it. It's a great comment. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the commissioners for the applicant? Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this request? If so, please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Seeing none. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this request? Please come forward. Seeing none. Is there anyone who would like to speak on this request? Please come forward. Seeing none. This time I will close public testimony. Ian, if you'll give us a staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff recommends approval of the special exception permit. The proposed use of the outdoor mulch production, sales, and composting facility is consistent with the general use of the area. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Do any commissioners have any questions for Ian or other city staff at this point? Would someone like to make a motion?
I move to approve the special exception permit subject to technical edits and to corrections of the planning and engineering divisions.
I second it.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
I have a question. Does it need to be subject to the approval of the floodplain variance by the Board of Adjustment?
It does not. The Board of Adjustment is for the building itself. He would still be able to use the property in a way that could facilitate his mulching and composting.
In theory, it could reduce the size of the building, too, to meet the code.
Yes.
So if I could just shed a little bit more light on that, what they're going in front of the Board of Adjustment for is a variance to floodplain regulations to basically allow what we call a flood-proof building to be located in the floodplain. So that's a type of building that if the floodwaters rise, the building, the property can be evacuated, and there'd be no property damage. The building's not going to be damaged by the water. The only way you can do that is with a variance. And in the event that he cannot receive the variance, I believe that a major portion of his business plan relies on that building, and so likely would not be able to use the property. But I don't believe that the special exception permit needs to be tied to that. There is the potential that he could still use the property, use the existing building, and maybe rearrange his plan, but yeah, not necessarily. So I hope that sheds a little bit more light on it. So.
Well, you talked about the height of the building. What's the number of that main just the floodplain area? Yeah, just the flat area where he's going to build a building. As far as like if he had to build it up out of a floodplain, how high would he have to build that mound in order to do so? What's that? 559 plus 1 plus? Is that what they call it?
About 10 feet.
You have to be 10 feet.
Yeah, so mounding up about 10 feet. So it'd be kind of hard.
A little tough.
And it's not so much that. The building's not a problem. It's any utilities that are inside that problem. It's not just the building being damaged. It's a life safety issue for anybody that happens to be there.
So is it like just the materials used on the building, or is it like you said, the utilities, the electrical's way up out of the floodplain? Is it?
Essentially both. The materials of the building, so that the building's not going to be damaged, but also making sure that utilities are, I believe, at that 1 foot over base flood elevation, so that they meet the floodplain regulation.
Right. So. Okay. Thanks.
Once again, I will ask, this is a little bit different than our other special exceptions, but this would be tied to their ownership of the property. And if they would sell the property, would it be transferable?
No, that requirement is specific for the short-term rentals, and that was something that was important in terms of holding property owners accountable.
Okay.
So
this one would transfer upon title transfer?
Certainly, he could sell the business to a different owner, and they could continue to operate it.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any other discussion? I think we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries 8-0. Again, will this be forwarded to the City Council on the June 18th?
Yes.
So June 18th at 6 p.m. once again in this room. Thank you for coming. I'm assuming, by the way, you got permission from the Kevans to use the building pictures?
Jim's my cousin.
Okay. Okay. I noticed the building, so.
Yeah. And that is exactly what the building looks like, down to the color and material.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate y'all coming this evening. We will move on to our last case this evening. It is case number P18013, 2303 West Main Street is appeal of a sidewalk deferral decision. This one is a little bit different this evening, so I think we'll start with some information from staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This one is a little different. It's an appeal, and usually appeals are directed to the Board of Adjustment. They're the body that hears most appeals on administrative decisions. However, for sidewalk deferrals, as this one pertains to, the appeal process is through the Planning and Zoning Commission. I believe that the City Council assigned that to the Planning and Zoning Commission because this is the body that tends to do a tighter review of development-related issues. So the procedures are a little bit different for this case. For the most part, the procedures are the same as is established for the other cases that are under consideration for tonight. There's one important change, and that is all people who are giving testimony or comments must be sworn in. And the reason for this is that the case is an appeal, and appeals are handled differently. If an applicant or other interested party disagrees with the decision that's made tonight, the only route that they can pursue is through circuit court. And so that's the reason that people giving testimony must be sworn in, is so that that testimony can be admissible in court. The section of the city code pertaining to this issue actually states that this would not go on to the City Council. This is the appeal body, and the decision is final as far as the city is concerned. And so, Mr. Chair, if you could, at this time, ask all who are planning to speak on the case to please stand and be sworn in.
As our staff has said, anyone who would like to speak on this agenda item, please stand.
No, not commission members, no.
Or the city attorney. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, answer, I do.
I do.
I think everyone standing did that. Thank you.
And I'll take the podium for this one.
You are going to give the information tonight on this one, Eric?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Tell us a little bit about it, Eric, please.
So I do have get to that case, a bit of a presentation overview of some of the different items to consider for this case. I want to start with an overview of a sidewalk construction requirement and an option to request deferrals. So pedestrian facilities are, of course, an important component of streets. They improve personal mobility, promote alternate forms of transportation, contribute to healthy lifestyles, higher quality of life, contribute to safety. So there's this need for sidewalks within an urban environment. And so an ordinance dealing with sidewalk construction requirements was established in 2008. That was established in conjunction with a sidewalk plan that was adopted the following year. I know that this body and many others were involved in the creation of that plan. And so back in 2008, 2009, there were some presentations regarding the need for sidewalks, the need for a sidewalk plan, and the need for ordinances dealing with construction of sidewalk. This body and a lot of others, there's a fair amount of stakeholder involvement in the creation of that plan. Involved numerous groups amongst the community. Janice McMillan at that time largely spearheaded the development and presentation of that plan. So that plan identified a number of different goals. A couple of the goals that I'll point out, I don't want to go into too much detail on the plan, but a couple of those goals include connecting neighborhoods with schools and also filling in gaps in the sidewalk network. And so the sidewalk plan included a map of required sidewalks for the community. And so this is a map that we refer to regularly when doing development reviews. This is the map of streets, basically the streets where sidewalks would be required for any development that's along that street. Sidewalk construction is triggered by building additions, parking lot additions, and also new subdivision plats. So it's really a building addition that is the item for this case. When a property is looking at building a new building or building an addition to an existing building on the property, if they front one of the streets shown on this plan, then there's a requirement to construct sidewalks. Okay. That requirement is limited to 5% of the construction costs for the project, so there's a little bit of a financial mechanism built in there, making sure that the sidewalk construction is not overly burdensome when compared to the project as a whole. And so at the time of the adoption of the sidewalk construction requirement, it was realized that there would be instances where sidewalk construction would be problematic. For that, in order to address that, there was a deferral process established where a deferral could be granted for a specific situation. A sidewalk deferral is not a variance for sidewalk construction. It's merely a delay in the construction of the requirement to construct the sidewalk. So sidewalks would still be required to be constructed by the property owner, just at a future date. And so the mechanism that would affect a deferral, if granted, would basically be the city calling in the deferral, notifying the property owner that it's time to construct sidewalk, and then they'd have 1 year in order to do that. But they would still have to construct it and construct it at their expense. And so the deferrals are processed, or basically there's a list of criteria that must be met for a deferral to be granted. And the review of deferrals is an administrative process. It's a process conducted by city staff. And so some of the deferral criteria, basically an application would have to meet one of these criteria. So if there is a property, or a project next to a street where the city had plans to actually construct sidewalks on that street or reconstruct the street, a deferral could, it could qualify for a deferral. Or where there's no curbs or gutters existing on that street, it can be difficult to locate a sidewalk without, in the absence of curbs and gutters. If a property's in an industrial area with no pedestrian generators in the area, so very large lot industrial properties, essentially. Where an alternate pedestrian way is proposed through the property, so some alternate way for pedestrians to get through the area that's not a sidewalk. Where there's a very low residential area, so very large, like estate type lots with over 350 feet of frontage, so the sidewalk would be a large burden on the property. Where there's a property fronting on a state or federal highway with speeds greater than 49 miles an hour, so 50 or more. So basically situations along the major highways. And then if a sidewalk construction requirement would create an unusual hardship, and that is a hardship not incurred by a similarly situated property. So a couple things that are not in that list. Lack of connecting sidewalks is not one of the criteria for deferral. So even at the time of the adoption of the plan, it was recognized that there could be instances where the sidewalk construction would result in call it an island of sidewalk that did not connect on either side. But that over time, other projects would connect that sidewalk, either through other private development or through publicly funded city sidewalk construction projects. Also, cost of a sidewalk is not included as a criteria for deferral, except in the rare instance where a property would lose all value. As mentioned, the requirement is capped at 5% of construction cost, and so there's that financial component built into the requirement for sidewalks to make sure it doesn't have an overly large portion of a project budget. And so the case before you this evening is specific to the St. Joe School. And so up on the screen is a map of the area submitted as part of the original application for deferral. So it's got a lot of labels on it. I'll point at this screen over here with the laser pointer. But the St. Joe School is located right there, includes the adjacent cathedral. That's right across the street from City Park. And so the school is planning, actually construction underway for a 4,000 square foot addition to the rear of their gymnasium, located about right there. So it's a gymnasium addition that triggers the requirement for sidewalk construction. Project cost of approximately $1.5 million, and the property frontage for the property, which includes the cathedral property, is about 1,035 feet. And so that basically, there's a line on here, but it doesn't show up well in this room, from right there going down to right there. And so the property owner did file a request for a deferral of the sidewalk construction requirement. I filed that request based on 4 of the criteria that I mentioned. And so that request is contained within your packet. City staff and the director did review that request, and the director's determination was that the situation did not meet the criteria and denied the deferral with responses to each one of the criteria. Again, the deferral, or sorry, the letter and packet for the denial is contained in your packet as well. So the property owner did choose to file for an appeal. And so once again, the appeal is contained within your packet. It's basically in the form of a letter to the city clerk. That's how it had to come in. So the appeal request is, I believe, basically based on one of the criteria. So they originally applied for 4, were denied by the director, and then appeal based on one of them, and that the sidewalk construction would create an unusual hardship. I'll really rely on the applicant to state the rationale for that appeal. I will jump ahead though and state the staff position, and that is that the deferral request was properly denied, that the situation is not unique among similarly situated properties. In fact, the property would rank high in terms of need for sidewalks, being located in front of a church and a school, in a residential area and near a park, and with another school located a short distance away, the West Elementary School. And that the addition of sidewalks would improve rather than detract from the pedestrian safety level for the area. Also, and so there are some sidewalks that exist on the south side of West Main Street, and so this is an aerial photo that's zoomed out a little bit further. So over on the far right-hand side of the screen is Dix Road. And then, so the subject property is here. And so the yellow line in front of the subject property is what, basically the sidewalk construction requirement for that property. The yellow line over here is existing sidewalk that extends from Dix Road to Forest Hill Avenue, but it's on the south side of the road. So I'm only identifying the sidewalk on the south side of the road. So that there is a gap there. So with construction of this sidewalk, there would be a gap there in between existing sidewalk and what would be constructed for this property. And so the resulting sidewalk gap between Forest Hill and the St. Joe property, which would be just under 1,000 feet in length, would rank well compared to other potential city-funded sidewalk projects for a couple different reasons. One, the proximity of schools, and then also the stated goal within the sidewalk plan to fill gaps in the sidewalk network. So it would be a potential city project that would rank very well in accordance with the adopted sidewalk plan. Also, that city staff feel that the best time for sidewalk construction for a property owner is when construction forces are mobilized. I think that's one of the reasons that the requirement for sidewalk construction is tied to construction activity on the property, and that if the construction is deferred to a future date, it would be a standalone project for that property owner, having to go through the entire construction process, including hiring of a design engineer and construction firm in order to effect the project. This issue before the Planning Commission is an appeal. Essentially whether the decision or interpretation by the director was in accordance with the intent and requirements of the ordinance. The three potential actions that are available to the commission are to either affirm the director's decision, to reverse the director's decision, or to remand the decision. An action to either reverse or remand must state the rationale for the decision. Basically, that's the same type of criteria that'd be applied for the Board of Adjustment in an administrative appeal process. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'd prefer not to get too deep into questions until the applicant has had an opportunity to speak as well. So,
Thank you, Eric. Do any of the commission members have any questions for Eric at this point? Is that what you're wanting the applicant to come up and then we'll?
If there's something that's just needs to be answered right now about the perhaps about the deferral process or something, I'd be happy to answer that. But any technical questions on this request, I'd kind of prefer to wait until after the applicant has spoken.
Just one quick one, and I was kind of trying to find this in our packet when you were talking about it, so it may be here and I just didn't see it. Is there a list of the criteria that you mentioned in our packet? Or do you have something you could put up on the screen for the criteria?
It's on the application.
It doesn't seem to follow what the reason for the deferral request at item 4.
So the three different items that are in your packet for this request is the original deferral. I believe that's where the criteria are listed because that was the original application. So within that application form, it lists all the different criteria. And then the second thing is the director's denial, and then the appeal is the third.
Like I said, I was trying to follow, and I just wasn't sure I caught
Okay.
it all. Thank you.
Eric, I have some questions, and I don't know if they're, I don't believe they're specific to this request to some degree, maybe a little bit, but there's a couple that I would like to ask. One is, again, I'd like to state that this is a new situation for this board tonight, so we're all learning a little bit as we do this. So I think why I want to ask this now is so that when we're listening to the applicant, we can process that. One is, you stated, I believe, that it's 5% of the construction costs of their improvement to the property. I believe you stated that they have told you that the cost of construction is $1.5 million. 1.75. I was doing my math and all that. So my question is 1.75 times 0.05 would be about $88,000 just that they would be required to pay if that. My next question would be is if the sidewalk project costs $100,000, the applicant would only be required to pay the $88,000 roughly, correct?
As part of this construction project, yeah, it would cap out at that number.
Okay, so once again, if construction costs are $100,000 and the applicant only is required to pay 5%, we have a gap in dollar figures.
Perhaps.
Okay. Then my question is, who pays the gap?
Okay, so the requirement does cap at 5%. So in the event, and we don't know what the construction cost for the sidewalk would be. At least I have not.
Hypothetically speaking,
yeah.
If the cost is $100,000 and the applicant is required for $88,000, who covers the gap?
Okay. Actually, it would be a portion of sidewalk not constructed, and we would work with the applicant in determining where that would be. In this case, it would probably be the stuff on the far western side of the property.
Okay. And maybe I'm getting off in the weeds, but then of that 5%, does that include the engineering and everything that would take to figure what this project costs? I'm not an engineer. I know we have one in the audience, and he's probably not going to want to raise his hand and say, I charge X dollars. But my question is, once again, if the applicant is any applicant is required to pay 5%, is that 5% of materials being put on site, or does that 5% include everything for this project? Let's use, again, the example, the engineer says, I need $20,000 to do the engineering. Then once again, there's less money in the pot, so therefore, the sidewalk gets reduced again. Correct? Incorrect.
Do we have a stance on that?
I'm not for sure what the council intended when they wrote that ordinance.
I guess it's up for argument at this point. I mean, is that a fair statement? I'm trying to wrap myself around this as a new application, so that we all, as commissioners, I believe this is a very serious situation of how the costs are going to cover.
Right. In this situation, they're not doing a lot of other site work. In many instances where there's development, a site plan is being drawn for the site, and so the inclusion of a sidewalk in and amongst the other work that would be done on the site would be somewhat, it would be absorbed in there. I'm sure, that there would be a specific call out for the design of a sidewalk when you're designing the parking lot and driveway entrances and everything else. But in this instance, given that the construction is happening behind the existing school, perhaps it's slightly different than what you would typically see in a typical development scenario.
I agree with Chris. That's fundamental. I mean, the percentage of cost is fundamental what it's going to cost. Not, well, the engineering doesn't count. It's only materials. We don't count labor putting on the materials down. It has to be. I mean, you can't reason off of it. You can't make a decision off it unless you know exactly what the costs are, what the percentage is.
And so, if I may, what the language that it contains within the code is, the property owners with street frontages greater than 350 feet limited to, expending at least 5% of total project costs toward public sidewalks.
Total project cost.
Yeah.
I think
that's all in, all done, that's design, that's everything, in my opinion.
I would agree. I think in this situation before us tonight, if the applicant has to go hire an engineer because it's completely separate construction and the engineer says it's $20,000, that comes out of that pool of 5%.
And I kind of agree with what you say, Chris, except in an instance like this, they wouldn't have the engineering cost for the sidewalk because they're building an addition on the back.
There was no I'll bet there was no survey work done on the front side of that property. There's no topography. There's nothing.
That's what I mean, yeah.
On the front side of this piece of property.
Can we ask the cost? Do we know the number?
For the sidewalk?
Yeah.
So there is a representative, the engineer representative, so if he speaks, I think that'd be the most appropriate person to try to answer that.
Eric, if I understood you correctly when Chris asked you his question, if the 5% of the construction cost didn't cover the entire cost of the sidewalk, theoretically you'd end up with a sidewalk that would only go part way? You only build what $88,000 would take, as far as $88,000 would take the sidewalk?
Essentially, yes, and so that I believe was again a situation that the property owner would work with staff in terms of determining the best location for that sidewalk.
I haven't. Are we done with this one? I got another. And I was trying to write some notes down as you were talking. The last hardship, deferral, reason, whatever you want to talk about it, there was something that I didn't understand. Could you back up to the very last of the reasons that it can be, the deferral can be granted?
Of the different deferral criteria.
It was the very last one.
The last one. if the sidewalk construction requirement would create an unusual hardship, and that is a hardship not incurred by a similarly situated property. And so, imagine, it's largely language that is almost the same as what someone requesting a variance from zoning code requirements might be looking at.
Because it doesn't fit.
For some reason or another, that it's unique, and because of its uniqueness, it's creating a hardship.
Unique, that's a good word. Thank you. I like that.
Eric, I have another question. Once again, this is a deferral, and it's not a variance. So it is a delayed construction, maybe in layman's terms. Did you explain what the mechanism would be if the deferral is granted and then sidewalks are not installed right now? What would trigger the city to go back to the property owner and say, okay, now you've got to do that? And I guess what I'm looking for is there something in the code that triggers that, and it's not just, again, someone at city staff saying, well, it's time to put the sidewalks in. And then I guess a part of that same comment is, will there be, once again, if the deferral was granted, is there some mechanism that the city puts in place on this property, something at the recorder's office or something like that, that would trigger, so if the property is ever sold, this is a little bit different situation, but it could be sold, that a new property owner buying it might be brought aware of that. So a deed restriction, or I think Dave maybe help me here with what I'm looking for, but so that, let's just say it's 15 years down the road and somebody's selling the property and everybody's forgot about that, when they do the abstract work, that it would trigger and go, hey, by the way, we've got this situation that may cost you a lot of money.
Okay. Yes, I'll answer those two questions in reverse order. First, the recording. So there would be a document recorded on the property to serve as notice to future property owners. So it's not quite like a lien, I think, because its primary purpose is just to give them notice that there's this outstanding requirement and to point them in the direction of the city if they need more information on that.
So once again, the abstract would show that, so if there's transfer of title, the abstractor would get it and say, hey, by the way, you need to go see the city.
Exactly, yes. Okay. So that in the event the property was sold, that the future owner would know of this outstanding requirement and be on notice, so to speak, that it's there. For the first question on the action to call in a deferral, so to speak, the language here I was going to quote from it. So the language simply refers to the owner, shall be required to install sidewalks within 12 months of notice from the city that sidewalks are now to be constructed and that the deferral has been terminated. That is the language that is in the code. It's been the interpretation that is an administrative action. It's an administrative action that approves the deferral, and an administrative action that would call it in. I'll look for any other interpretation there.
So then could I make the argument that if the deferral was granted and city staff could next week call it in?
I believe that is an unlikely possibility, but yes, that the mechanism to call it in is administrative. So.
And what would happen? Let's say the 88,000 is the figure we've been using, carries it within 100 feet of the entire property line.
Mm-hmm.
do they still get the deferral? I mean, then is everything okay and there's no deferral, there's nothing? It's just you've got a 100-foot gap between it and whatever else is on either side of it?
Basically. And then if there were a future construction project on the property that triggered the requirement again, then it would continue on. So.
Well, just out of curiosity, if you, and I know this would probably be highly unlikely, but what if everybody along the West Main on that side builds small additions, and so that you just got little piecemeal pieces of sidewalk there because they couldn't afford, the 5% wouldn't pay for the entire frontage?
And so, kind of unlikely there. I mean, it was recognized at the time of adoption of the ordinance that a property that's a standalone with no sidewalk in the vicinity, having that construction requirement and building a sidewalk, that it would be a single piece, but sidewalk has essentially the policy of sidewalks within the community has been basically without a sidewalk requirement for so long that there are significant stretches of the community without sidewalks. That has been recognized as a problem, and the policymakers, the city council, have come to the determination that there is this need to construct sidewalks and put this in place, knowing that it would be a series of stretches, but then over time, as more property develops or as publicly funded city sidewalk projects come through, that those pieces would be connected, and over time result in a more complete sidewalk network. And so no, any one particular property isn't going to solve the sidewalk problems for that area, but over time it will.
And I don't know if Carlos can answer this, or if this is something that you all in P&Z can answer. And I know this has come up before, and I don't remember what the answer was years ago. Is there a reason the city does, while they have this plan and outside of budgeting, is there a reason the city hasn't said, okay, we're going to do the south side of West Main in 2020? And
defer to
so
the public
everybody's
works.
going to have to chip in their fair share, but we're going to cover this section.
There is within the city code, there has been a long history of various funding mechanisms for sidewalks. And so if you look back through portions of the city code, you'll actually still find references to situations where the city council would decide that either a street and or a sidewalk would be constructed in this area, and then there would be a public notice of that, and people would have the ability to come and talk about that. But then ultimately the city council could basically push that project forward if they so chose, and everyone would be tax billed for the entire cost of the roadway or sidewalk. And so that's the way it had been in the past. I don't believe that the city has used that mechanism in a number of years. I've worked at the city now for 15, and I don't believe that we've used that particular mechanism. And I think in part it might be because that there's a sales tax, and many projects are funded through the sales tax as opposed to being tax billed to the individual property owners. And so, there's a difference in how things are done now than they used to be. But there's a mechanism within the city code presently that has been used as recently as a couple of years ago, where a neighborhood could petition the council to construct a sidewalk or new curb and gutter or whatever in front of basically it's limited to a block. So you would need to get 75% of your neighbors to sign a petition that they want to participate in the cost of a project. And so if that were to happen and the council were to approve the remaining funds, then that project would move forward. And so most recently that happened on a piece of Broadway Street. El Marine was redone that way. Vineyard Square and a few others came to pass because of that type of a project situation. So I'm not for sure if that answers the question, but
as if some of a problem like this could hopefully be eliminated if the city had a definite plan, and of course I realize they have to have the money to do it.
Right.
But where people would know, okay, we're going to be doing West Main Street in 2020, and so
right.
you got to have enough money, or there's a special lien set against the property.
Right. I will state there is a plan. There is an adopted plan for which streets would have sidewalks constructed on them, and so that is the page out of that plan. And so, is there funding to do all of that? Well,
Eric, we've got a commission member that's leaving, and she started this agenda item. And she's not leaving; she's stepping out for just a second.
Pause.
So why don't we pause so she's here for everything? Is that fair with city staff? Yeah. Let's do that. I'd like for her to be here for everything. You're important. We wanted you to be here. Yeah. Okay, I'd like to mention that our commission member is back, and so we will again start the meeting. Eric, if you'll take off from where you left off, that'd be great.
Yeah, and
we have all city staff back, so we're good. So go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just referencing that there is a plan for construction of sidewalks. It is a component of the adopted sidewalk plan. Of course, funding. It would take some time to construct every sidewalk shown on that plan. I believe Mr. Nunn was more concerned about the specific funding over the course of the years, and defer to Public Works on how they arrange that over time. I believe a lot of it's tied to the specific sales tax initiatives that take place every 5 years. But
yeah, and just for instance, in this particular sales tax cycle that we're in presently, there's $400,000 over 5 years that have been designated towards sidewalks, and some of that is for new sidewalk construction, and then the council has designated some of that for the repair of existing sidewalks. And so the exact split is probably a little fuzzy, but about 2/3 for new sidewalks and about 1/3 for the repair of existing sidewalks. It's just to give you kind of a scale of what the city has. And we try to work also to try to get additional grants and use some of that money to match, as a match for grants, to try to stretch that money a little bit further.
And so this isn't meant to sound negative. If it does, it's just, which is great. I mean, there's the plan, but there's just not any funding to go with it, so that anybody knows specifically where sidewalks are going to be constructed at any particular time.
That's generally correct.
Okay, thanks.
Eric, and I'll go back to one comment that when I was talking about the numbers and how far we can build, and then we run out of money and all that. Did I understand you correctly? If the 5% of this project got us 3/4 of the way through this property, and then we stopped at the percentage left over, and sounds like the city's not going to pay to finish it out to their property line. They get done with their construction, they get done with this much of the sidewalk, but we've got this piece over here yet to go. And 2 years from now, they come back and they do another addition of some sort. Then they would be required to finish that last portion of the sidewalk on their property.
that's correct.
Would they be required to make it ADA accessible?
The sidewalk would have to be constructed according to ADA requirements. One of the more problematic things with the design and construction of sidewalk is oftentimes there is existing driveways that do not meet the cross slope requirement. So it's kind of been my experience that's one of the issues, is that it often requires a redesign or reconstruction of existing driveways to retrofit the property to meet ADA requirements for sidewalk.
And so then at the property lines, then would they have to do a ramp down to the street? Or where the sidewalk ends?
At the property line, it would end, and then it would be either responsibility of the adjacent property owner, if they were to have a sidewalk construction requirement triggered, or again if there was some other project that
so
took
technically
place.
they would only need ramps at the at the ADA ramps at the driveway crossings?
Driveway crosses, and yeah, in the event, and it isn't the case here, but in the event you come up to an intersection. So.
Okay.
Eric, does the sidewalk on the north side of the street that's existing, does it meet current requirements? The one that runs from Binder to Bel Air?
I don't know that I can attest to its technical details.
I would believe that it does not. The requirements, ADA requirements, have been changed since that sidewalk was built. That sidewalk currently is, I believe, 4 feet wide and is immediately adjacent to the back of the curb. And so everywhere where it crosses through a residential driveway, you have the sort of the wings of the approach of the driveway, and that slope is not consistent with an ADA compliant sidewalk. As you continue to the east, through the park, for instance, there is a trail that goes through the park, and that also is not ADA compliant due to the longitudinal slope. When you have a sidewalk that follows the roadway, the longitudinal slope can follow the roadway slope. But in this instance, where the trail isn't following the roadway, then it would be required for strict ADA compliance to be not steeper than 5%. And although I've not been out there, my recollection is that it's steeper than that.
And just to be clear, we're doing. They want to do just a 1-year deferral.
No, if there was a reference to a year, it's that they would, if that's the mechanism for calling in a deferral, that they would have 1 year to a property owner would have 1 year to construct the sidewalk, and then if they did not, then the city would construct the sidewalk basically on their behalf, and tax lien the property is basically what the code reads. Okay. So no, it's not a specific time period. The request that they submitted was for a deferral, and then that could be called in at any time, in accordance with city code, whether it be a few days from now or many years from now.
Eric, and hopefully we'll quit asking you questions and we can get on to the applicant, but I'm struggling with, the next thing would be is, where I live, my home has no sidewalks. So if I came into the city and said, I want to put a big addition on my home, the way the code is written today, then I would have to put sidewalks in front of my home? Is that correct?
And so I believe that a lot of the requirements were tied to commercial projects and things that were greater than two-family. I don't know that is what's in here. So I don't know if I can really answer your question in great detail.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would say if your street is not on that plan, that the sidewalk would not be required unless some sort of subdivision requirement kicks in. Would that not be correct?
It is the primary mechanism of sidewalks in residential areas is a subdivision plat. But yes, if it's not shown on the plan, then it would not be required.
I'll have to look at that map later. Okay, let's move forward. Is there any other questions for city staff from the commission members at this point? Thank you, Eric, for all your testimony and trying to help us work our way through this new situation.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. At this point, we will ask that the applicant come forward. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Spencer Allen. My physical address is 912 Martin Way, Jefferson City, Missouri. But I'm representing St. Joseph Cathedral School, which is at 2303 West Main Street. So this is the property in question. And Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate the chance to talk to you, to answer some of the concerns, and to, first and foremost, just address some inaccuracies, I believe, in what Eric presented here just a second ago. First off, I want to point out that the yellow line up here in front of our properties, because this pretty modest little project here, let me just tell you what it is. It's a gym expansion with some of the same goals in mind that the city has, which is safety. We want to be able to secure our doors. We don't have air conditioning, so we prop them open. There's an intruder concern. We have kids that practice late at night, so we're just expanding our basketball courts so we can have additional practice space and get them home. And we have kids who love theater, so we're building a bigger stage. And so we love that kind of progress. Love sidewalks. I'm a runner. I'm on the board of directors for the Chamber of Commerce, and I'm all about some of the things we're supporting to make Jefferson City a great place. I love what the tree guy said a little bit ago about the beautiful architecture here. I'm all about it, and I'm all about solutions that keep kids safe. Just several years ago, David and I very respectfully wrestled a little bit on the best crosswalk to put out in front of our school. I didn't care so much about the one that they put out, and I'm not resurrecting that argument, but that was not a financial argument. I know Eric said that one of the reasons for a deferral is not funding, and I want to really emphasize that when I speak on behalf of the school, I'm talking about safety, because that was not a financial argument. The city was paying for it. I didn't think it was safe. I'm not going to say if I was right or wrong here, but I spent a lot of time talking with him and Matt at the time about this was not the best crosswalk. Leaving that aside, that's my argument here too. I agree with the city on safety. I agree that this is the type of street that needs a sidewalk. We have a sidewalk, a fully complete one across the street. And we have a crosswalk that we've accommodated, and we keep kids crossing there safely. We watch it. It's right out in front of where I can supervise. We have good control of the situation. We're also not making, as Eric said, a sidewalk to nowhere argument. We've never made that argument. And the handout I've given you, I've given a list of other variances, deferrals rather, that have been granted over the lifespan of this sidewalk plan. And I've contacted those individuals as well as the contractors, and several tell me the reason for their deferral is a sidewalk to nowhere argument. I'm getting it straight from them because that's all of the Sunshine Law has given me as their list. So I spoke with them. One business said we also had a difficult hill, and so that was an argument against the sidewalk. That property now has raised that hill and put a parking lot there. So I don't know how much thought went into granting that deferral, but they don't have the argument we do. We're not arguing that. We're not arguing sidewalk to nowhere. We're not arguing cost. Consistently, our main argument has been safety, the same argument the city has. And consistently, the city has not answered that argument. We brought it up in the private meeting. We brought it up in our initial application. I brought it up in my appeal. It still was not addressed. Our argument is not sidewalk to nowhere. Our argument is sidewalk to one of the most dangerous places for students to cross. We have a unique situation. We have a situation that provides no precedent for the city, because no other business in town, if you want to call it that, though we're a non-for-profit, we don't get any local funding, it's all just local support. No other business in town has clientele of about 470 kids, 14 and under, that doesn't already have connecting sidewalks. We don't set a precedent. But what's going to happen here is we can cross the kids safely at our little crosswalk right here. Okay, and I just want to point out real quick here, this line actually, we were told in the meeting, goes across this property too. And if the city feels as passionately as they do about keeping kids safe, I'm kind of thrown by the idea that we'll just fund the portion that we can afford, which I guarantee you when the engineer speaks is much more than $100,000. We've done our studies on it. That we're just going to abandon the sections that we can't pay for if it's truly safe. But what I'm concerned about is that the sidewalk will take the kids to right here, and they will have to cross right here. This is our private drive. No crosswalk can get them across there because it's a private drive. We can cross them over here to a fully functioning sidewalk. The most dangerous street they have to cross over there, and one that's within our line sight, is Binder. So we did a study today. We got our October count, where we count how many people are in the pews, and we sat and counted cars. During the 20-minute period that kids would arrive at school, 30 cars entered or exited Binder Drive. 30 cars. We can control that. We can see it. We can put a crossing guard there. Down here, where if you visit our school, you cannot see. Totally out of the line of sight. A sidewalk would stop, and a kid would have to cross on his or her own. 269 cars passed in 20 minutes. Okay? So we've done our homework on that sort of thing. We've done our homework, and we're going by the same sidewalk plan the city has. And I want to quote some things from their plan that I don't think are being honored in this decision. We've also done our research into an authority in this area, which is the Federal Highway Transportation Safety Agency, who's done a study on pedestrian safety, specifically looking at youth. And I have these statistics for you in your handout. Youth who cannot judge gaps in traffic. And we're going to ask them to cross a drive that is sometimes 3 lanes deep, right? With 269 cars passing in 20 minutes. We're going to tell them that's a good idea, and we can't stop that traffic. It's not a crosswalk situation. We're going to say that's a good idea, and that's what the city is telling the kids by sanctioning travel in that direction, right? We've looked at what this study has shown. We looked at what the city study has shown. And we've looked at the fact that, we know the burden of proof is on us, so we keep bringing up the safety argument, and it keeps not getting responded to. And I think that that's a satisfaction of the burden of proof. I'm not arguing the money costs, but since it was brought up, it's much more expensive than what's being revealed because, as he mentioned, a couple of things. One is that we have to make it handicap accessible. We have to adjust all of our entrances. It's a very expensive thing. And we're basically funding sidewalks for about 5 properties here that are all linked for a project that's funded by basically school families. We have some parishioner support. By and large, school families to get up to 1.75, and now we're going to build a sidewalk that makes their kids' pedestrian travel even more dangerous with that stewardship. One of the goals of the city sidewalk study is good stewardship of funds and safety. This is not only safety neutral, it's safety dangerous. I also want to comment, Eric did make the comment when you, first off, when you asked, would I have to build a sidewalk? We were told yes in the meeting, so I don't understand his hesitation in answering firmly yes. Even if you're not on the plan, he was answering that it's mostly for industrial or places that are 2 or more occupancy. It's not what we were told in the meeting because we said, hey, this would be a different discussion if our sidewalk was connected. And we were said, well, we were told it will be because as all these houses, single-family houses, do remodels, it'll build a bunch of segments, which Eric's words were that is kind of unlikely that that will happen, and the city will come and connect them all. So now we're hearing that we're going to build this sidewalk, and there's no time in the near future it's going to connect to anything. So I asked them in the meeting, I said, what happens when the kiddo travels to the end of our sidewalk? What does the 3rd grader do then? Does he just dart across West Main away from our controlled crosswalk? Or does he just hop down onto West Main and continue walking with the flow of traffic? And anybody who knows safe pedestrian travel, you walk against the flow of traffic so that you can see if there are alert drivers. My world is a world of impulsive kids and drivers that are distracted. I see them all the time on their cell phones. I see them cruising through this crosswalk light, but at least we can be there to hold them back. And they want to put a situation that's a legal liability for us and that's going to get kids hurt. And I'm kind of curious what the motivation is when all we're asking for is a deferral. Not a firm, no, you never have to build it, but a deferral. Let's defer it until what they say will happen happens. Put a sidewalk up against our property, then enforce us building it. That's all we're asking. We're not asking to never, ever have us build it. It's a deferral. And as David said in our meeting, well, code is code. I understand your safety concern. Code is code, but deferrals are there for a reason too, which is it doesn't make sense now. I get the sidewalk to nowhere approach. I get that segments become a complete sidewalk, but you don't start with the school. You connect the school to something. And so I have one parent here, if he would like to speak. I had another who couldn't make it. That one is the mom of the only kid we have who actually lives on this side of the street and would benefit from a completed sidewalk. And she doesn't want her next year kindergartner and her next year 6th grader walking home on that sidewalk. She understands they're impulsive, and sometimes they break the rules. And sometimes they'll tell our crossing guard, I don't want to wait for you to hit the light. I'm just going to take the sidewalk that's here because that's what sidewalks are for. She wants him to be able to walk over there where he can walk with friends, get down to the crosswalk that's in place at West School, cross, and walk to their house, which is just a block away. That's what that mom wants. She got stuck at work. She couldn't come, but here's from the city study, page 13. And I'm going to refer to that, and I'm going to occasionally refer as well to the study done by the Highway Transportation Safety because it answers some of the concerns that are in here. Page 13, that this study should honor, it should be an implementation of the school study done in 1993. The school study done in 1993 shows one sidewalk, the one that's in place, that's across the street, because it understood the topography, the terrain of the houses along our street, and I've shown you pictures of them. I'm showing you the mature trees that would have to be cut down just to connect to anything. I'm going to bet those property owners are not going to do that, and we're going to have a very long-lasting segment of a sidewalk that we'll have to pay to repair when we finally have something to connect it to, because it would have deteriorated so much, right? Page 13 also says that part of the city's obligation in putting in a sidewalk is education of pedestrians regarding responsibilities. It's one of the things that David and I talked about when we put in the crosswalk. We were the first ones in the area, and I said, David, if you're going to do this, no one's seen this before. Do some sort of media campaign to educate individuals on what this blinking white light means. Because no offense, Andy, I know you're JCPD, but I've seen the police department go through those lights. Right? We need to educate the public. And we need to educate these kids, but I've been the principal for 11 years and have yet to have the city contact me and say, we want to educate your kids about safe pedestrian travel. Yet they want to charge us $80-some thousand to put in a sidewalk that's going to cause hardships for us and not answer for it. Never even acknowledge it in their responses. It's irresponsible. Page 15. The study calls for equity regarding for who pays for this construction. So this handful of school families will be incurring a cost of $88,000. And then we just won't complete it because the city will not come forward and complete a project that they say will add to the city's safety. We need this. Well, then why not complete it? Why not complete it and connect us to West School? Connect us to Donald Street. Connect us to something that makes sense here, or jump in and share the cost. But as we heard, there's no plan for that. We'll just only require you to do what you can, and then the next time you add a band room or expand your parking lot, you'll pay the rest of it. Do not put sidewalks on page 15 in areas where few pedestrians are expected. There has not been a traffic study in the 11 years I've been there. I've yet to see the rubber strips across the road to gauge the traffic. I've never seen someone standing out with their counters to watch for pedestrians, and I'm there every day, 11 years. Maybe there's some during the summer, but as Eric said, one of the variance reasons is there's an alternate pathway. We have sidewalks in front of every building on our property. Someone wants to walk from one side of our property to the other. It's a very safe way to do it. It's not as if we're neglecting the need for public safety. It's already there. So what is the purpose of this sidewalk? Page 7, and I want to jump real quick here too, just on that point, when we're talking about educating the kids, in your fact sheet, look on the, I think it's the back page, whenever possible, I'm just going to highlight a couple things. Individuals should walk on the edge of the street facing traffic. This plan would have them walking along with traffic, city sanctioned. Down of several bullet points, here's the type of people that are 3 times more likely to be involved in pedestrian crashes. Children with impulsiveness, hyperactivity, anxiety, and problem behavior. I have meetings with the parents of those kids every day. We want to put a sidewalk that asks them to cross out of view right in the middle of West Main. And there's not even a sidewalk, I don't think, to meet them on the other side because that's where it starts to dip deeper into Memorial. There appears to be a relationship between risk-taking and safe street crossing. Children's poorly developed impulse control may be one of the causes. Right? But we're not unlike any other business in town, right? But we are. Our clientele, 470 people under the age of 15. Down a little bit further. Often these crashes occur mid-block where there is no intersection or crosswalk, and look where they want the sidewalk to end. Bottom of the page. City's not done its job in educating our kids. Maybe they think the parents will do it, but the study shows that 10% of parents are all that have properly done it. And then finally, the last point, traffic safety professional argues that young children are developmentally unable to make decisions about traffic gaps because they have to attend to velocity, distance, and predict arrival times. 269 cars in 20 minutes. It's not going to happen. I'm in a place where we have policy, and sometimes we have to find exceptions to that because it was created sometimes in a vacuum, right? I get that. When we do put procedures in place, the worst mistake at a school is to put in a procedure that is successful if everybody acts perfectly according to plan. You put in procedures that account for the parent who's never picked up, the person who's distracted, having a rough day. This doesn't account for either. It's just a sidewalk to enforce code. It doesn't answer our questions. So last few points here, and I know you probably have read my appeal. It goes into more detail. So if you didn't read it, just ask me those questions and I can expand. So master plan on page 19, that any sidewalks put in should be accessible and contribute to pedestrian safety. This does not, because according to Eric, we're not going to have a completed sidewalk meeting up with it anytime soon, right? And then consumers on one side of the street, construct on page 19 again. This is goal 3, strategy 3 in the city's own plan, construct on one side of the street when feasible and safe, as shown in the 1993 study. So I don't know who decided, let's just go ahead and up that game a little bit. We're following the city's own plan. One last note here, and I know I've said a lot here, which is we didn't think this deeply on this at first because we thought it was just a slam dunk. You've seen the other deferrals, the big list of them. Be in touch with them yourself. If you don't want to give us deferral, at least put this off and make the city do a traffic study or something. You've seen the places that I list on there where they've gone ahead and just publicly funded it because it would help the businesses in the area. Well, if we care that much about supporting the schools and the kids, that seems like the ideal place to spend that $400,000, in my opinion. But in Mr. Sanders' response and Sonny's response, he pointed out something that we had talked about this some time ago, and we had a plan for an alternate version of a sidewalk right in front of the school. One of his arguments was that plan wouldn't work because it would take away from existing parking. So I've shown you just a random Google shot. I can't control when this was taken, of all the parking that would be lost in front of our property. I think I counted as like 13, 14 spots. And I took another shot where I went up to the roof a couple days ago at dismissal because I wanted you to see that at dismissal and pickup, our lot is totally full and congested. You can't get through. Emergency personnel can't get through. Parents line up in 2 lines. If they don't, traffic backs up. Honest to God, it's happened once all the way down to Gerbs. We've got to have 2 lanes. So if a parent shows up, needs to pick up their kiddo in a hurry, first responder needs a quick place to park, fire truck, or even on a busy day where the city is hosting something at the park, we're backup parking on that strip. That goes away. It's just gone. Suddenly, first responder, the grandparent on Grandparents' Day who's looking for extra parking, the parent who has to pick up their kid quick, there's no place for them to go. It's an extreme hardship. And I appreciate you pointing that out. I don't understand why at least the first one, that hardship I just mentioned was a new one that I mentioned, but I don't understand why the safety argument keeps getting put aside when we'll grant a place an exception because they have a big hill that they subsequently have bulldozed down. I don't understand why it's not reasonable to say, hey, we'll build the sidewalk, though I'll tell you I have hesitations because of my action with the clicker this morning, but I don't understand why it was so hard for them to say, you know what, you need to do a sidewalk here, and since we have total control of enforcing it at some point in the future, let's just all put this on the table. We're going to let you see the plan in action, and then we'll come and have you build the sidewalk. I mean, who loses in that deal? Nobody does. So that's my argument. I mean, I know I've got some people here that can speak to some more details, but I just want to keep the kids safe. So any questions you have, this is your chance, and happy to answer them as much as I can.
Thank you for your testimony. Do any of the commission members have any questions for the applicant at this point?
Real quickly,
sure.
You answered most of the questions I had. In your answer to the reasons on the application for deferral, the things that you addressed really, there doesn't appear to be anything on there that addresses safety.
Under the hardship, safety is mentioned in our application. Okay. Yes. And then, and then we also talked about it. That was the exclusive conversation, more or less, in our meeting with the city. We brought up some of the other points, but it's under hardship.
Okay. Well, and I understand that. I was just thinking that none of these reasons, not on your part, but none of, if you just look at the application, there's nothing there.
It's under hardship, but there's another reason listed for hardship, so you might not have seen it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant?
So I was just wondering, the parking spaces you're talking about, they're along the road there.
Yes.
And your crosswalk's right in the middle of that.
Mm-hmm. But it's yellow curbed.
Yeah, it seems like that's kind of a safety issue itself.
Yeah, and it is, you're right. First off, it's yellow curb, so no one's able to park right up by the crosswalk. During our dismissal times, unless there is an emergency like I mentioned, we ask parents not to park there so that we can keep visibility. So to answer that concern, I agree with you, but we want to keep the area because there are some unique instances when people need to pull up. We ask them to pull a little bit out of the way, but we just don't let there accumulate. So when you see the satellite photo there, that's most likely a Sunday Mass, when we don't have kids in session. And I wouldn't, even in that case, I wouldn't be terribly opposed personally, I'll just say, to doing the whole curb yellow and having it be just emergency parking. But I think that there has to be, for the pure safety of the school, there has to be a place for people to park that doesn't obstruct West Main when we have the parking lot clogged.
And then to
Sir.
make sure I understand that point, are those parking spaces that are diagonal then to West Main, are those people don't park there during the times of schools?
They do. That's actually staff parking. They're inside the curb, so he's referring to parking on the outside of the curb.
Oh, I got you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But what we want to do is we want to be able, because we can stand when we're watching kids, we can be on the other side of the diagonal cars. So what he's talking about, we don't want another little barricade visibly. So we do control that. If you drive by any day at 3, unless there's a unique situation like I mentioned, you won't see cars there.
Any other questions for the applicant from the commissioners at this point? Thank you, sir,
Thank
for your
you.
testimony. Is there anyone else with your application group that is going to speak, whether it be, I think you referenced the engineer or a family member? Or
My name is Andrew Leonard. I live at 114 Boonville Road. I have 2
Mr.
children
Leonard,
that attend.
let me stop you real quick. Are you on behalf of the application, or are you just wanting to testify that you're for or against it? I want to kind of keep the form out of the...
I'm sorry, I'm just here to testify, not
Okay.
as far as the application.
Let me stop you then.
Okay.
And so as far as the application goes, you guys are...
Then we probably have, Jeff, you want to speak on behalf of the application? So Jeff is he's with Circle, so he's with the general contractor doing the
Right.
project. You can speak a bit more to cost, probably.
Jeff, if you would, please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, Jeff Wilson, 2020 Saddlebrook. I am a St. Joe parishioner. I am with Circle Contracting, currently working on this particular addition project. And I also have a engineering background. First off, I'd like to say, cost-wise, we don't have a complete design done. CMPS did a preliminary design and layout. You would have extensive redesign and regrading of all the entrances, drives off of West Main, and the cost for that we just did an in-house preliminary cost. If it accounts for all their properties there, we were looking in the range of anywhere from $125,000 to $175,000. That includes the engineering cost, which is significant. It is totally separate, and really this construction cost has no efficiency in doing it at the same time as us or not. It's basically a complete project. It's on the other side of the building. There's no other activities out there construction-wise for this current addition.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Is there any questions for the applicant at this point? Thank you.
A couple other things I'd still like to say, though.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
All right. So the 93 study, as Spencer said, was specifically done. The city basically and the schools talked back then. I think there was a total of 11 schools that combined forces with the city, and the schools and the city split the cost of this engineering pedestrian safety study. Just as a responsible parent, not to mention a responsible engineer, you never start building sidewalks in front of a school to nowhere. If you look at pedestrian study reports on public safety, it is a complete system. It doesn't lead kids to dead ends. It doesn't give them opportunities to make bad choices. And if one kid gets hurt because we build 1,000 feet of sidewalk to nowhere, what are we all in this room going to say then? Is it worth it? And I understand there's code and the city needs to develop, and that is great. I am a taxpayer, and sidewalks everywhere are great, but ultimately the safety of our kids is what we need to be concerned about. Thank you.
Anything else?
Nope.
Okay. Any questions for the applicant?
Just real quick, do you know, with the $125,000 to $175,000 cost analysis and design, does that affect the existing crosswalk to any degree, or would you have additional crosswalks that you plan to put in?
That does not plan for any additional crosswalks across West Main. That would be additional.
Would this, having to do the sidewalk, would that adversely affect the existing crosswalk at all?
Could possibly. We hadn't looked into great detail, but it could affect, I don't know the layout, and Brian may know that, the layout of the crosswalk signalization in relation to where the new sidewalks would go. Okay. The other thing we're not mentioning that I just thought of is, what about, so we keep talking about connecting to West School, what about going the other direction? That's leading kids to nowhere. So even if the city does connect this segment, we still have an issue heading west, and it's leading kids to an unsafe condition there as well. So, thank you.
Any other questions or comments for the applicant? Thank you. Is there anyone else with your application group that needs to speak this evening? Please state your name and address for the record, if you would, please.
I'm Brian McMillan with Central Missouri Professional Services, 2500 East McCarty Street. And I'll just hit on three things real quick. A lot's been said already about everything, but I guess since I'm the engineer, the design of the sidewalk would fall under my realm. And of course, you know, this project was in the back of the property, and previously there was an addition done, and the city kind of overlooked the sidewalk requirement up there, and so we really didn't get involved with even thinking about a sidewalk up there until this came up this time. So the design of it would involve doing quite a bit of survey work all along the front of the property, which was not done as part of the project, which a lot of times would be a normal thing to do on a project. You'd survey the whole property and whatnot. So that's kind of where they're talking about the added cost for the extra design work. It's just it's kind of a unique situation, but you know, and the topography out here is very different than a lot of places. Like I think of West Edgewood Drive. I've done quite a few site plans out there, the Double Vision area where the credit unions are. You know, we have sidewalk to nowhere there, but the street was built and designed to accommodate sidewalk, so it was real easy to just come in, dig out a 5-foot wide swath, and pour the concrete and put it in. This project here is going to require reconstruction of driveways, significant reconstruction, especially the east driveway. It's very steep, and to hit on your ADA comments, to get that in compliance with ADA is going to be a really big deal. And that's where a lot of the excessive costs are going to come from, rebuilding the driveways and whatnot. So then I guess a second thing I want to touch on, you know, staff keeps saying about how this is a school and, you know, sidewalks are good for schools. I think this school is different than just your general public school. A public school is in a neighborhood and it serves that neighborhood. This school serves the entire Central Missouri community. I don't know where you get students. You know, you may get them from other counties for all I know. Yeah. So it's not a really, you know, I'm sure there are some students in the neighborhood that serve it, that go to the school, but it's not like West School where there's probably, you know, hundreds of walkers that go to school. You know, it's a different situation at this school.
There's 10 walkers to school on our busiest weekend.
Okay. So I think that's an important point to think about, you know, when we're discussing this. This isn't your typical school. And then a third thing I want to touch on, since I did the original deferral application, I kind of approached it from a different point of view, where the questions that the deferral asked were things that have already been asked in the past. And in the mid-'80s, there was a sidewalk project done. You know, we keep talking about, well, what if we do a sidewalk project? Well, there was one done in the mid-'80s. And it was decided then to not do sidewalks on that side of the street. And I think a lot of the reasons were the topography and they didn't feel a need for one. But I can't say that. I wasn't there. My owner of our company, Mike Bates, was the public works director at that time, and he did have a little bit of insight into that he would have to speak on that if he had anything to say about it. But anyway, I just think it's, when I answered the questions on the deferral application, I was kind of saying that this has already been thought about and done, and those questions were answered, and that's why we're here today. And this subdivision, this area hasn't really changed. It's a well-established neighborhood. The houses that are there now were there in the 80s. The school, you know, it's grown. The church, the property has grown, but for the most part, the rest of the neighborhood has not changed. So I just think that was important to note too, that this is an issue that's been talked about for, 30 years now, or thought about, and I'm sure before that they've thought about it too. So other than that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Is there any questions for the applicant at this point? Thank you for your testimony. All right, at this point, we will open up for a public hearing. Once again, I will ask if there's anyone in the audience who'd like to come up and speak in favor of this request. If so, please give your name and address for the record.
My name is Andrew Leonard, and I live at 114 Boonville Road. I have two children that attend St. Joseph Cathedral School, and because I do shift work, I'm not always able to pick them up from school, so oftentimes they walk home. Boonville Road is to the east, so in this case, if they were to walk down that new sidewalk put in, they would get to the end of the St. Joseph property, the sidewalk would end, and have to cross West Main Street. Where that sidewalk would end on the east side of that property, if you stand there and look to your left, it's a hill crest, and two, it's about, I'm going to guess, about 200 feet outside of the flashing yellow light marked school zone, speed zone. So not only are we asking my children to cross the street where there's no crossing guard and no crosswalk, but where the speed limit's higher. I know the request for a deference is not based on where the sidewalk ends, but as a parent, my argument is where the sidewalk ends, because that's where my kids are going to cross the street. As it is now, they cross with a crossing guard, supervision. Again, they cross the street there, and then they can walk home on that north side of the street with no problems. I'll answer any questions anyone has.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard. I'll open it up. Does any of the commission members have any questions? Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else in the audience who'd like to come forward and speak in favor of this request? Seeing none. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to speak in opposition to this request? Seeing none. Is there anyone who would like to speak on this request? Seeing none. Okay, at this point, I will close the testimony for the public, and then we're going to go into closing arguments for staff. Eric, I do believe because of the format of this hearing, we will have some closing arguments from staff and the applicant. I do know in a lot of testimony situations we limit the discussion to a certain time period. I think it's 3 to 5 minutes, if I'm thinking correct. Is that something that we want to do here so we don't rehash things and go through a 15-minute dialogue between yourself and or the applicant?
That is your prerogative. From a staff rebuttal situation, I don't think we have anything else to add from what was presented. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I will. I think if the commission is comfortable with that, do we want to give a 5-minute maximum rebuttal time for city staff and/or the applicant. Does that seem fair? I think I'm getting okay. We'll inject that there will be a 5-minute maximum for any rebuttal from city staff or for the applicant. With that being said, Eric, do you have any other comments or?
No,
Okay.
I don't think we have anything else to add. Certainly be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay.
So.
I will ask the commissioners if there is any questions for city staff. Yes.
The crosswalk will remain. Is that correct? We're not pulling the crosswalk out.
No, the crosswalk would remain. Not having received a plan from the applicant to know what their intentions are with the sidewalk, it would be hard to say how the impacts, how it would impact. But ultimately, it wouldn't seem as if it would affect it greatly.
Okay, so if in theory the crosswalk remains.
Correct.
So we're going to have sidewalk go down both sides. Correct. There will be sidewalk on
going,
both sides.
leading away from the crosswalk in both directions. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Correct.
And then, never mind.
Any other comments for city staff?
To make sure I understand, in looking at the application and the items listed under number 4, reason for deferral request, and as was mentioned by Spencer earlier in answer to my question, is safety a factor that would enter into that last item as a legal matter?
I believe that's the case they're making. I believe a staff position is that stated in the initial presentation is that having sidewalks, the sidewalks are assumed to be an improvement in facilitation of pedestrian activity, not only for the school but also for the rest of the area. So I believe that's their argument. So I defer that safety argument to them.
I understand that, but just from looking through this, it doesn't appear that any of these particular items specifically address safety, and I wasn't sure how that entered in.
Right. There isn't anything within the criteria of the city code that specifically states safety as a reason for a deferral. And again, I believe that's basically from what Eric has just said, that typically an accommodation for pedestrians that's being made by adding a sidewalk, gives the opportunity for someone who might be on the street to actually get off of the street. And so in that case, that person is safer. So I think for that reason, that is why safety isn't one of the criteria listed for a deferral to be granted.
Any other questions for city staff from the commissioners? And if not, we will move on to the applicant for their rebuttal or any final comments. Okay, if the applicant or applicants would like to come forward, I will give you 5 minutes total for your whole group. So please tell us anything you'd like.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I agree with David. Yeah, we want to get individuals off the street, and as I showed, there is an alternate way to do that. We have sidewalks all the way across, and it's a pretty empty parking lot most of the time when school's not in session. And so there is a plan for that. Other than that, the city has not shown how this sidewalk that won't be totally completed and is going to lead the kids to a not visible middle of the block abrupt end, forcing them to cross a section that when they're arriving at school, that 20-minute period, will have about 269 cars go through in a 20-minute period, how that makes them safer. That is under hardship, by the way. They may say it's not because they're assuming sidewalks make people safer. They do until you get to the destination of the sidewalk, and then that determines their safety there. And so that becomes an extreme hardship for us. And I wish any of them would have just visited to hang out with me for a day to see how hard supervision is, and now they want to put a supervision spot down and out of sight. It's the same thing when we did talk about the crosswalk. I invited the city to come and just spend a day with us. You've got to look beyond the theoretical, let's put sidewalks. You've got to look at the reality of the situation. They were not aware and have not talked about the psychological understanding of youth and impulse. They haven't addressed the safety. It's just assumed sidewalks make kids safer. I bet we could all brainstorm and think of a lot of places kids are not safer because of where sidewalks end. And that makes it a hardship for those who don't want those kids to get hurt. That's a hardship. It's an extreme hardship. So if the city has given a reason why a sidewalk now is preferable to a sidewalk when there's a connecting sidewalk, then I think you have a good reason to accept their decision. But if their case is that, hey, this is going to be a great thing when we connect all the way, then let's just wait until then. But as Eric said, that's highly unlikely, right? So it's not going to happen anytime soon, and the city didn't step forward and say, we'll fund it. So how long are we going to have this section of sidewalk that we'll have to send teachers down to because I can't trust a junior high crossing guard out of sight? How long are we going to have this before we suddenly have a connecting sidewalk, before these established houses decide we're going to do some extensive remodel and incur this expense of sidewalk and retaining walls? Look at the topography. If they've made that case, if they've answered the safety argument, if they've shown how this is not a hardship for schools, hasn't been addressed, then I get it. But if not, then let's just say, hey, you guys got to build the sidewalk. Just do it when it makes sense. Because as Jeff said, you don't start with the schools. And that's it. They just haven't answered any of that stuff. And so if I put that argument forward, they've not answered it. That's a burden of proof that's been established. And that's the criteria that city code says we have to establish. And they haven't done their homework on this. We have. So that's all I have. I'll stay here in case there's questions.
Thank you. Is there any other questions or comments for the applicant? Thank you for your testimony.
No problem. Sir.
But as I understand it, this is deferral.
Deferral.
But then it's still within 12 months.
No. He was saying, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, but you're saying the 12 months is like at the point the city says you guys must now build the sidewalk, we have 12 months to build it. But they could make that decision 10 years down the road. They could make it next week. He said that wouldn't happen. But 12 months is our timeline to get it built. And if I read extensively on city code, if we don't build it, the city can come and build it and give us a bill for it, put a lien against the property. That's what the 12 months is for. But no, if they give a deferral, that deferral could last for the next 50 years. It could last for the next 2 years until the cathedral does a big renovation, and then, hey, we all win, because the cost of the sidewalk will be spread out over a fourth of the state. You guys will get money from all over the place. Feed Jeff City. Right now you're hitting up a bunch of school families who are scraping together their pennies and trying to fund this.
Any other questions for the applicant? Again, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else on behalf of your group that's going to speak? You have about 2 minutes left.
Jeff.
Jeff, you have 2 minutes.
Okay. I just want to say, listening as a citizen of Jefferson City, there are obviously some loopholes in our sidewalk code and this whole process here. A lot of questions couldn't clearly be answered, and as a citizen, I think that's something that needs to be addressed in the future. So,
anything from the commissioners for Mr. Wilson? Thank you for your testimony. Anything else from? Okay. Very good. Thank you. At this point, I will close all public testimony in the hearing. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for city staff at this point after the testimony? Seeing none. I believe the next thing we will do is move for a motion.
I do have a comment, though. We've dealt with this for years and years, and then more years, about sidewalks and sidewalks and sidewalks. And almost every time I thought, yeah, we build it, eventually we're going to connect it. Look at Missouri Boulevard. But in this case, I agree with you. I went to St. Joe's School. I walked to St. Joe's School. I know every inch of that park. We used to. You're going to go across the street to get to the park. You're going to come to the end of that street and you're going to cross. You're not going to go across what used to be Sugar Baker's property. I don't know how many acres in there. There's never going to be a sidewalk across there. I don't ever see a sidewalk across Sugar Baker's. And so it's going to be truly a sidewalk to nowhere. I understand his dilemma completely. And I'm going to vote to give them a deferral. I just don't see, in good conscience, why we should put a sidewalk there. Just because it sits something in the code. Just like the Dix Road connector. It was something we were supposed to do, but it was the dumbest thing we ever did. I mean, sometimes you just got to do the right thing, not what sits in the paragraph subsection of something. That's my thought.
Any other discussion from the commission members at this point?
Just hopefully briefly, I certainly see what the city is saying, and from a legal standpoint, these items are enumerated here in the application. It seems to me, based on the arguments that have been made, something about safety should be mentioned as a possible item. I agree with David that in general sidewalks are typically a safety feature, but like anything, there's always some exception, and it seems like this application doesn't go quite far enough. I think the city presented legally what they need to present, but I think there's an item here that isn't addressed, and that's safety.
Any other comments or? Sure.
Since this is my last meeting night, after 6 years, I'm just going to say it just like I feel. I think it's a sidewalk going to nowhere for $80,000. There's not a sidewalk going this way. You're going up towards Sugar Baker's, there's no sidewalk going that way. And in my opinion, it's $80,000 spent for nothing. It's in a sidewalk going nowhere. That's the way I feel about it. Is that clear enough?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other comments or concerns from the commission members at this point? Okay, once again, we're at the point where we need to make a motion. I believe city staff has directed us that we will either make a motion to affirm, reverse, or remand the decision. So if anybody wants any clarification on that, I'll defer to the city councilor. My next two comments will be is I will ask city staff, we have 8 voting members tonight. What is our numbers need to be for in favor and against once a motion has been passed? What's the percentage of, does it have to be a majority or supermajority or?
Okay, so 2 things there I'll address. First, the voting allowance. It is just normal planning zoning procedures. That is a majority. There's 8 members. Should it result in a 4-4 tie, then the chairman would vote to break the tie. The motion, you know how we usually recommend, positive motions. Well, this is a different situation because there's 3 different options there. Affirm, reverse, or remand. And again, this is directed to the appeal. So a motion to affirm the appeal is a motion to basically agree with the director's determination, not issue a sidewalk deferral. A motion to reverse the decision would be a reversal of the director's decision. And if you get into a remand situation, I'm going to let Brian do all the talking.
If it is a remand, then you would direct that Sonny make the decision again, but you could have him consider certain things on remand.
So once again, if a motion is made to affirm, we are upholding the decision of staff. If we reverse, obviously, we don't agree. And then if we remand the decision, we could ask Sonny to reconsider and then possibly end up here again.
You can, on a remand, it is a reconsideration. However, you can give him other criteria to consider on the remand, or other factors. If something was brought up in testimony tonight that you believe wasn't fully fleshed out on remand, you can have city staff examine that.
Okay, I think that clarifies it for commission members. The other thing I think we're going to do this evening on this particular case is we're going to have roll call. So if we're at a point for, are we ready for any more discussion, or are we ready for a motion? If someone is ready for a motion,
I'll make a motion.
Go ahead.
I would move that we reverse the decision and allow the deferral. Did I state that correctly?
So you have made a motion that you want to reverse the decision of staff and accept the deferral. Okay?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, we will go to roll call.
Okay. Cotton? Aye. Deacon? George?
Bob? Do you want to agree with the applications for the appeal?
Vote not to put it in.
So, to be clear, you're voting yes. All right, so I think we need a yes from you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Uh-huh. Lester?
Aye.
Nunn?
Aye.
Vaughn?
Aye.
Yarnell?
Aye.
And Mahoney?
Aye.
Okay, that's
The motion carries
8-0.
for the reversal of staff decision 8-0. It is a deferral, and we all understand at some point it may be called to be put in.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, just so there would be some paperwork, basically the filing of that information that we filed on the property. We'll send you a packet basically for signature and complete that process. It's a little bit cumbersome, but that's what we have in place. So,
Thank you all for coming this evening. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for your time. I know it was a late evening.
Yep. No, thank you all.
David, thank you.
Yes. Nope. It has been a late evening. We do have some other business. We have two items. Eric, first I'll jump to update of prior cases. Do we have anything? And if we do, if it's lengthy, we're going to defer it.
Just two things that were approved at the City Council since the last meeting. Final plat for Boonville Road. There's a couple lots out there. I believe I've seen them listed on the real estate website for sale if you're interested. And then also the rezoning on 994 Diamond Ridge from CO to C1 were both approved by City Council.
All right, thank you. The last thing, and definitely not the least important, but probably one of the more important things, is we have two of our commission members who are going to be, should I say, term limited? I don't want to say retired. We don't want you guys to retire, but I'll start with the one that's probably been doing it the longest, and it was kind of interesting to talk about what David has done for the city of Jefferson. I was a city planner back in 1995, and David was serving our community back then. By the plaque that the city has provided this evening is David has been on this commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission, since 1989. I'm not good with math, but that's a long time. But David has done a wonderful job for us. I do know that we are definitely going to miss David. He brings a lot of expertise to this commission. He brings a lot of history with his time of service. He brings a lot of real estate knowledge, common sense, and good things like that. So on behalf of our commission, myself, the city council, we'd like to tell David we really appreciate what he does. We hope that he might serve in another capacity somewhere else, but I would like to applaud David for everything that he's done. Like to say anything?
The only thing I'd like to say is it's been great working with different staff members over the years. Everybody's been terrific. It's been a pleasure, and it just shows that if you move often enough and go to different wards, you can serve a while.
I do have an item or two just to add to Mr. Nunn's service. I did a little bit of research and came up with what was going on in 1989. And 97 cents a gallon for gas. You could mail a letter for 25 cents. 4.6% inflation. Can you believe? How could people live? I don't get it. And Reagan, Ian was born that year, and the next year. So he was not born. Reagan was president for about a month, and it switched to Bush. But so that's what was going on. So.
No pictures of what he looked like in '89 versus today. I wasn't going to say that. The second person that we're going to lose is Mr. George. Just like David, he brings a lot of character to this commission. He brings a lot of knowledge. He's got a lot of real estate knowledge, a lot of common sense. It's been a pleasure of mine to serve with him. I think, once again, he's brought a lot of positive things. Sometimes he votes a little bit the wrong way, but we enjoy that too. Bob was put on this commission in 2001 and will be ending with us this year, so we've appreciated it. It's been a pleasure, sir.
Thank you. You guys are comparing presidents here. I got called back in the Navy by President Truman. When was that? Gas was probably, 15 cents? But I enjoyed working with you guys, and I love all of you.
Yeah, so
very thoughtful.
So I do have a slide for you as too, Mr. George. It's a little bit more kind, I think. So you got Bill Clinton's picture, and
I thought maybe that was a picture of.
Inflation had dropped a little, price has gone up a little, but I was interested looking for the statistics, and that's what we got right now is $2.49 a gallon, 50-cent stamps, 326, about double what we had in '89, I think. Oh, certainly, anytime.
Thank you very much. Very thoughtful. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Once again, we're losing two great commission members. I know Eric has said in the past that we always need somebody else to volunteer. I'd like to stress to city staff and to us that we need to be looking for good replacements for ourselves. I have mentioned that over the last few weeks and traveling around that we're going to have some vacancies. So please get the word out. Hopefully the city will put something out.
Mr. Chair, I do have a bit of an update on that. There are some names that are going through the process of appointment. I believe that they're appearing at the next city council meeting for consideration. I believe that the decision was made to hold one spot open, basically in the hope that someone from Ward 4 steps forward for consideration. That's a ward that is underrepresented on the commission. And so there is one spot that I believe would still be open no matter what the council decides that is upcoming, and that is for Ward 4. So if there's anyone interested from that ward, certainly encourage them to look into it.
Well, very good. It's been a long meeting. I appreciate everybody's patience tonight with all the new stuff, and I will announce us as adjourned. Thank you all.